His facial features twisted and warped before transforming into those of a young man, who appeared to be around 16 to 17 years of age. His pupils had also turned bright red, and he was giving off an overwhelming scent of blood and gore. The young man removed his hands from his head before slowly standing up straight again. He looked around at the human and devilish beings down below with a peculiar expression, then appraised his own hands before suddenly bursting into raucous laughter. "I've finally arrived in the spirit realm, so that really was a viable method after all. Haha, I'm probably the first sacred ancestor to have accomplished this. It really is a wonderful feeling." All of the high-grade human cultivators were very alarmed to hear this, while the high-grade devilish beings were ecstatic upon getting a clear glimpse of the young man's appearance. One of the high-grade devilish beings immediately half-knelt onto the ground and greeted, "We pay our respects to our sacred ancestor. Congratulations on descending into the spirit realm, sacred ancestor." His greeting seemed to have acted as a reminder to the other devilish beings, and the entire devilish army immediately knelt down in unison. As for the human army, all of their faces instantly paled as they looked up with horror and despair in their eyes. The devilish lords were still rather bewildered, seemingly more hesitant than elated. Master Azure Dragon's expression changed drastically before a cold look appeared on his face, and he yelled, "No need to fear. This devil was only able to descend into this world after possessing a host, so he most likely doesn't possess even a tenth of the powers of his true body. We can still win this battle. Fairy Lin, get the aura integration beast to kill this devil while we hold off the other devilish lords." Fairy Lin Luan was rather hesitant, but after taking a glance at all of the human cultivators standing on the city wall, she gritted her teeth and nodded as she abruptly thrust a finger toward the crimson talisman on her own glabella. The aura integration beast suddenly let loose a thunderous roar at her behest, then expelled a gust of fierce yellow wind out of its cavernous mouth. The devilish beings around it were all blown aside, and it flapped its wings vigorously, forcibly tearing its way out of the devilish army as it flew toward the young man. Even though the young man hadn't displayed any of his powers yet, the aura that he was giving off struck the beast with a sense of danger. As such, even without Fairy Lin Luan's instructions, it was still inclined to kill this young man in case he posed a threat to it later on. Meanwhile, Master Azure Dragon let loose a loud roar, and the 7 short blades re-emerged over his body as he transformed into a giant azure dragon once again. Howling winds and bolts of lightning erupted around him, and in the face of his ferocious barrage of attacks, the devilish army around him was unable to pursue the aura integration beast. Tai Long was unleashing countless hammer projections with his pair of giant hammers, and the attacks seemed to be extremely powerful, but he was rather distracted as he was focusing most of his attention on the aura integration beast and the young man. Han Li was naturally extremely alarmed by this turn of events as well. Even though this wasn't the actual true body of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang, it didn't seem to be an ordinary spiritual sense clone, either. The aura that the young man was giving off was truly formidable, and far superior to that of the average late-body integration cultivator. Now that the aura integration beast had been unleashed on the young man, Han Li also stopped what he was doing to appraise the situation. Feia was naturally quite relieved to see this, and he hurriedly consumed a few antidote pills, then began to circulate his magic power to force the poison out of his body. If someone below the body integration stage had been infected by the poison of the revolving evil spirit light, they would have already been killed, and he was only able to last this long as he was able to forcibly repress the poison with his mid-body integration stage powers. The young man faltered slightly at the sight of the aura integration beast before murmuring to himself in a surprised manner, "To think there's an aura integration beast present. No wonder all of you still haven't won this battle yet. I just so happen to require a steed. I guess you'll suffice." As soon as his voice trailed off, the young man flipped a hand over, and a small purple cauldron appeared over his palm amid a flash of purple light. The young man laid a hand onto the cauldron and uttered the word "net." The cauldron immediately began to revolve on the spot, and an ancient rune emerged from within it amid a flash of black light, then shot forth directly toward the aura integration beast. The aura integration beast opened its mouth to expel a gust of ferocious yellow winds upon seeing this, and at the same time, its wings transformed into a yellow cloud that completely concealed its entire body. The giant beast then hurtled directly toward the black rune without any pause, and it was quite clear that it was very confident in its own defensive abilities. A cold smile appeared on sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's face upon seeing this, and he also made no effort to take evasive measures. After just a few flashes, the black runes flew directly into the yellow cloud and vanished without a trace. In the next instant, a thunderous roar of shock and horror rang out, and the giant beast was completely immobilized in midair. There were countless black threads that had bound its body, and these threads were extremely thin, but the beast was unable to break free from them no matter how much it thrashed and struggled. A cold smile appeared on the sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's face upon seeing this, and he suddenly turned toward Han Li. Han Li immediately shuddered as a chill ran down his spine, and sacred ancestor Zhu Guang remained completely expressionless, but he suddenly waved a hand toward Han Li. At the same time, he uttered the word "come." A burst of rumbling rang out as the giant rainbow pagoda nearby abruptly rose up into the air, then vanished into thin air in a flash. In the next instant, bright rainbow light erupted over sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's palm, and a miniature pagoda appeared above his hand before being tossed toward the aura integration beast. He then made a hand seal, and the pagoda transformed into a burst of rainbow light that instantly inundated the giant beast. When the rainbow light reverted back to its pagoda form, the aura integration beast was nowhere to be seen. Almost at the exact same moment, Fairy Lin Luan exclaimed in a panicked voice, "My talisman can no longer sense the aura integration beast." Han Li's heart immediately sank upon hearing this. As the true owner of the Purple Cauldron and the Rainbow Pagoda, the two treasures were significantly more powerful when being wielded by sacred ancestor Zhu Guang. Han Li wasn't confident at all that he would be able to escape from the pagoda again if he were to be sealed into it for a second time. Master Azure Dragon was also very alarmed to see this, and he immediately yelled, "Go!" Bright spiritual light then erupted from his Azure Dragon body, and he forced his way through a series of hammer projections that were unleashed by Tai Long before flying directly back to Heavenly City. He had immediately chosen to flee the scene now that the outcome of this battle was virtually nothing more than a foregone conclusion. Fairy Silver Light and Fairy Lin Luan exchanged a fearful glance, then also fled toward two different directions. As for Han Li, he swept both sleeves through the air to withdraw his Azure Coil Sword formation, then also flapped his thunderstorm wings and fled the scene as an arc of lightning. "It's too late for you to try and get away now," sacred ancestor Zhu Guang guffawed. He immediately made a series of hand seals, and crimson chi emerged from his body before forming two figures that were identical to himself. One of them was holding the Rainbow Pagoda, while the other was holding the small purple cauldron, and they both chuckled coldly before vanishing on the spot in a flash. As for the final member of the trio, he stomped a foot, and crimson chi swirled beneath him before forming a small crimson canoe. The canoe was only 70 to 80 feet in length, but it was glittering and translucent, and there were countless profound rainbow runes inscribed on its surface. The canoe shot forth and quickly disappeared into space, with a young man standing atop it. When the canoe re-emerged amid a burst of spatial fluctuations, it had already covered a distance of several thousand feet, and it seemed that it would catch up to Han Li after just two more flashes. Han Li had detected this with his spiritual sense, and he was given quite a fright. In this dire situation, he gritted his teeth and transformed into a giant four-winged silver bird amid a rumbling thunderclap. He flapped his four wings vigorously and transformed into a silver thread that flashed through the air at an astonishing speed. "That's a cunning transformation technique. Hee. Do you think that'll be enough to allow you to escape from me? Go and take care of those body integration stage human cultivators. I'll go after that man myself." Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang chuckled coldly as he issued an instruction to Tai Long and the other devilish lords. Immediately thereafter, his two clones also emerged beside him as if they had never left, and they both made a hand seal in unison. Two pairs of crimson crystalline wings instantly emerged on the sides of the small canoe, and the canoe shot forth as a crimson thread with a vigorous flap of those wings. The canoe carried the three young men away into the distance in the blink of an eye, and they displayed no interest in the battle that was currently taking place. Tai Long was silent for a while before turning to the other two devilish lords. "You two, go after the two body integration stage human cultivators that escaped. I'll lead the army to take over Heavenly City." The final body integration stage human cultivator fled back into the city, but he's severely wounded and doesn't have the aura integration beast to help him anymore, so I'll take care of him along the way. As for that man, Master Zhu Guang is going after him in person, so there's no way he'll be able to escape. Will you be all right on your own, Brother Tai? What if the humans still have some other trump cards up their sleeve? Fairy Yu was rather hesitant. Rest assured, I have the infernal bloodform guards with me, and will be able to take care of everything, Tai Long replied. In that case, I'll leave everything here to you, Brother Tai. Fairy Yu nodded in response before flying away as a streak of pink light, heading straight toward the direction that Fairy Silver Light had just fled toward. As for Fei Ya, he had already forcibly repressed the poison in his body, and also departed as a streak of white in pursuit of Fairy Lin Luan. Following the departure of the other devilish lords, Tai Long yelled, "All of the body integration stage human cultivators have fled. It's time for us to take over this city." His voice was imbued with immense devilish might, and it rang out like a resounding thunderclap in the ears of the human and devilish armies down below. The devilish beings all let loose cries of elation, and they began to attack with even greater ferocity. As for the humans on the battlefield, all of them had turned deathly pale, and morale instantly plummeted to an all-time low. In this dire situation, Master Azure Dragon's voice suddenly rang out like rumbling thunder from some part within the city. HMPH, do you really think I didn't prepare any other trump cards? If you want to break our heavenly and city, you'll have to get past these 108 giant puppets first. As soon as his voice trailed off, over 100 pillars of golden light emerged in all corners of the city, then transformed into a series of golden armored guards. These guards were clad in golden armor from head to toe, and they were each wielding a giant golden sword that was around the same size as their bodies. All of them were also wearing visors that revealed only pairs of cold silver eyes. Even though these 108 golden armored puppets were only hovering in midair in a completely still manner, they were releasing formidable auras that weren't inferior to those of spatial tempering cultivators. The despairing human army was naturally greatly reinvigorated upon seeing this, and they began to retaliate against the devilish army with renewed vigor. Thus, the sound of violent clashes rang out all over the battlefield again, and Tai Long was rather taken aback by this situation. However, a hint of disdain then quickly appeared on his face, and he waved a hand toward the infernal bloodform guards around him as he commanded, "You don't have much time left, so participate in the attack right away. We have to tear down this city's main defenses in the shortest time possible." The devilish generals leading the army immediately gave affirmative responses upon hearing this, then quickly descended to join the devilish army down below in their attack against the city wall up ahead. As for Tai Long, he hovered up in the air and watched as the situation unfolded. With the inclusion of the infernal bloodform guards, the devilish army immediately gained a crushing upper hand, and some devilish beings had even torn through the defensive restrictions and made it onto the city wall. In response, the 108 golden puppets merely continued to hover in midair, displaying no intention of assisting the human army whatsoever. After appraising the situation for a while longer, a thought suddenly occurred to Tai Long, and he immediately flew back toward the devilish cloud. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D6 9B, letter 1D5 56, letter 1D6 8T, letter 1D5 68, letter 1D5 F2, letter 1D4 1C, letter 1D5 FC, letter 1D5 FA. After just a few flashes, he disappeared into a mountainous black arc, and the devilish guards in the arc were quite surprised by his sudden return. However, Tai Long offered no explanation to them at all before making his way into a secret chamber, then immediately activated the restriction that had already been set up in there. Layers of five-colored light immediately surfaced from the walls of the secret chamber, and a small white formation appeared on the ground. Tai Long strode over to the formation and made a hand seal before casting several incantation seals into the formation. Spiritual light flashed from the formation amid a faint buzzing sound, and a white jade altar slowly emerged at the center of the formation. Sitting atop the altar was a rusty copper mirror that seemed to be an extremely ancient artifact. A serious look immediately appeared on Tai Long's face at the sight of this mirror, and he began to chant something before opening his mouth to expel a ball of blood essence, which transformed into a cloud of blood mist that enveloped the entire mirror. Layers of azure light appeared over the surface of the mirror, and it gradually brightened. All of a sudden, light flashed from the mirror, and the image of an azure-robed elderly man appeared on its surface. This was a benevolent-looking elderly man with a head of gray hair, and he was seated on a black wooden chair. He was holding a book in his hand that was slightly yellow from age, and he cast his gaze toward Tai Long from within the mirror. Ah, I was wondering who was contacting me. Haven't you already joined up with the devilish army to participate in the sacred sacrifice? Why are you contacting me using this split-realm mirror? The elderly man asked with a smile. Tai Long pays his respects to Lord Wang. Lord Wang, Master Zhu Guang has descended into the spirit realm again. Tai Long extended a respectful salute before cutting straight to the chase. Again, has he sent another one of his clones into the spirit realm? That is indeed rather strange. Despite what the elderly man was saying, his expression remained completely unchanged. This is not a normal clone. Instead, Master Zhu Guang seemed to have used some type of secret technique to directly possess the Yang Devil with his spiritual sense. After being possessed, not only did the Yang Devil transform into Master Zhu Guang, his powers were also enhanced to an incredible degree. Judging from what I could feel at the time, he seems to currently possess around a third of the power of Master Zhu Guang's true body. On top of that, he's also able to make far better use of the purple word cauldron and rainbow light pagoda. With these two treasures, he was able to easily capture an aura integration beast that the humans had up their sleeve, Tai Long replied in a solemn manner. The elderly man's expression finally changed slightly upon hearing this, and he murmured to himself, "Is that so? That's quite interesting. Sacred ancestors like us can indeed make our spiritual sense descend into an alternate realm along with some of our magic power, but the amount of magic power that can be transferred is downright negligible due to the pressure from the power of that alternate realm. How was Zhu Guang able to bypass the power of the spirit realm to bestow so much power upon the Yang Devil? Could it be that he recently mastered some kind of powerful secret technique? By the way, Master Zhu Guang seems to be targeting a certain body integration stage human cultivator," Tai Long added. "Oh, tell me everything you know about that human cultivator." The elderly man was very intrigued. The human in question is a mid-body integration cultivator, but he possesses incredible abilities. He was just battling the yin-yang twin devils not long ago, and Tai Long immediately began to divulge the information he had on Han Li. After a while, he had revealed everything that he knew, and he fell silent as he awaited the elderly man's instructions. "You did very well. This information is very useful to me. You can go now," the elderly man instructed with a stroke of his beard. "Yes, Lord Wang. I'll be taking my leave now," Tai Long replied before casting an incantation seal onto the ancient mirror. An azure light flashed from the mirror's surface, upon which the image of the elderly man vanished. After contemplating the situation in silence for a short while, Tai Long strode out of the secret chamber, then flew out of the giant ark and re-emerged on the battlefield as a cloud of black chi. Meanwhile, in a certain wooden cabin within another realm, the elderly man had placed his book down onto his knees and was contemplating something with narrowed eyes. There was an identical antiquated mirror placed on the table next to him. "You sure are a bold man, Zhu Guang. I don't know how you managed to transfer so much of your magic power into the spirit realm, but are you not afraid that something will happen to your true body in the sacred realm? If your enemies were to hear about this, I'm sure a lot of turmoil will ensue." The elderly man murmured to himself as a cold look flashed through his eyes. At the same time, tens of thousands of kilometers away from Heavenly City, Fairy Yu was flying rapidly through the air while holding a crimson bead in one hand. After reporting the situation to an elderly woman in the Elder Devil realm, she opened her mouth and swallowed the bead again. After that, she immediately accelerated even further in her flight. Several hundred kilometers ahead of her was Fairy Silver Light, who was also flying through the air as a streak of silver light. The same scenes were unfolding with Fei elsewhere, who was carefully stowing away a translucent jade talisman that he had just used. Meanwhile, Han Li was flying through the air in his giant bird Kun Peng form, traveling at an incredible speed. Less than 100 kilometers behind him was a small crimson canoe, which was chasing him in hot pursuit. Han Li had naturally already discovered that he was being pursued by sacred ancestor Zhu Guang, and he was flying as quickly as he could as he flapped all four of his wings vigorously. However, the canoe that sacred ancestor Zhu Guang was standing on was the fastest flying treasure he had ever seen, and despite his best efforts, he wasn't able to get any further away from the canoe. Was he really going to have to battle this clone of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang? Setting aside whether sacred ancestor Zhu Guang had any powerful abilities up his sleeve, just those treasures that he was wielding were already quite a handful for Han Li to deal with. At this point, sacred ancestor Zhu Guang had already locked onto him with his spiritual sense, So, unless Han Li was able to open up tens of thousands of kilometers between them, there was no way he would be able to truly shake off his pursuer. As he flew through the air, Han Li was rapidly pondering countermeasures that he could take. Just as he was flying over a certain mountain range, Han Li suddenly released over 1,000 silver feathers from his giant bird body, each of which transformed into a formation flag. Lights of different colors flashed, and the formation flags vanished into the mountain range down below. Even while he was doing this, Han Li didn't slow down in the slightest, and after just a few flashes, he had emerged from the mountain range before vanishing into the distance again. A short while later, a crimson thread emerged in the distant sky, following which a small crimson canoe suddenly appeared in the air above the mountain range. The three identical clones of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang were standing atop the canoe, and the one at the forefront had his arms crossed and his eyes narrowed. Meanwhile, the other two both had their eyes closed and were making a series of hand seals. The small crimson canoe blurred, yet just as it was about to vanish into space again, over 1,000 pillars of light suddenly erupted from the mountain range down below before forming an extremely vibrant formation in the air above. The surrounding air instantly became extremely viscous, and the small canoe was inundated by the power of the formation. HMPH, does he think a temporary formation like this one is enough to trap me? Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang chuckled coldly. Immediately thereafter, one of the clones behind him withdrew his hand seal, then opened his eyes before expelling a ball of black light out of his mouth. There was a small cauldron hovering within the black light. It was none other than that purple word cauldron. The clone that had summoned the purple cauldron gently laid a hand onto it, then uttered the word break. Bright light immediately erupted from the cauldron, and it swelled drastically to over 100 feet in size. A huge black rune that was around 10 feet in size then emerged from within the cauldron before transforming into a black hurricane. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D5 FF, letter 1D4 1E, letter 1D6 AT, letter 1D6 A0, letter 1D4 1E, letter 1D5 54, letter 1D5 60, letter 1D6 96. The black winds were imbued with incredible power, and the entire heavens tremored in their wake. The giant formation only managed to withstand the ferocious assault for several seconds before being torn apart and dissipating into countless specks of spiritual light. The giant purple cauldron then instantly shrank down and flew back into the clone's body as a ball of black light. After that, the clone closed his eyes and began to make hand seals again. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang chortled with glee upon seeing this, and the small canoe shot forth as a crimson thread again, having only been stopped for the span of just a few breaths. At the same time, Han Li could sense that connection had been abruptly cut off, and a hint of astonishment flashed through his eyes. He was stunned that sacred ancestor Zhu Guang had managed to break his formation so quickly, and his heart immediately sank. Moments later, he abruptly flapped his wings, and over 100 more feathers shot forth. As soon as these feathers detached themselves from his body, they transformed into talismans of different colors that vanished into the surrounding air with only 2 silver talismans remaining on the spot. One of them flashed with silver light and transformed into a golden-armored warrior that was wielding a giant golden blade. As for the other silver talisman, it produced a faint golden shadow that abruptly vanished into the back of the armored warrior. As for Han Li himself, he showed no signs of stopping and vanished into the distance again after just a few flashes. Not long after that, spatial fluctuations erupted in the distance, and the small crimson canoe reappeared. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang was initially rather taken aback by the sight of the golden-armored warrior before a cold smile reappeared on his face. This human brat sure has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. It's quite remarkable that he was able to refine a shadow puppet of such a high caliber. However, this thing isn't anywhere near enough to stop me. As soon as his voice trailed off, the final clone standing on the canoe slowly opened his eyes, then raised a hand to release the small rainbow pagoda. The pagoda then rapidly swelled to tens of thousands of feet tall, before abruptly appearing in the air above the golden-armored warrior. The armored warrior remained completely expressionless, but it slashed its blade viciously toward the pagoda up above. A resounding boom rang out as a sword projection that was over 1,000 feet in length struck the underside of the pagoda, only to vanish like a sandcastle in the rising tide. The giant pagoda continued to descend, and countless streaks of rainbow light surged forth from it to completely inundate the golden-armored warrior. When the light faded, the pagoda had reverted back to its original miniature size, but the armored warrior was nowhere to be seen. The clone that had released the pagoda waved a hand through the air to recover it, following which the crimson canoe continued to fly through the air as a crimson thread. However, in the next instant, silver light suddenly flashed from the spot where the armored warrior had just been taken, and another golden armored warrior emerged amid a flash of silver light. As soon as it appeared, it made a hand seal, and an indistinct projection with 3 heads and 6 arms emerged. The projection waved its 6 arms through the air, and 6 massive balls of golden light came crashing down toward the canoe. Even before they had struck the canoe, sacred ancestor Zhu Guang was struck by a burst of formidable might that was both rather familiar and also completely unfamiliar at the same time. "That's a true devil projection," he exclaimed in a stunned manner. Meanwhile, the clone standing behind him flipped his hand over to produce a small purple cauldron, which released a purple light barrier that instantly enshrouded the entire canoe. The 6 balls crashed into the purple light barrier amid a string of dull thumps, only to be instantly absorbed by the light barrier. However, the canoe was still stopped for an instant as a result. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang quickly recovered from his astonishment, and his expression darkened as he raised a hand before drawing a peculiar-looking circle in the air. A large white hole instantly appeared in front of the small canoe, and crimson light flashed as a massive python shot forth out of the hole. The python pierced through the golden-armored warrior's body before winding itself around the puppet. The armored warrior didn't even get a chance to react before it was crushed into specks of silver light by the python, and the golden projection behind it also crumbled away as a result. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang harumphed coldly, and he was just about to continue onward when he abruptly looked up with a slightly bewildered expression. In the air above the canoe, the projection of a series of palaces and pavilions had appeared. This was none other than the 9 palaces heavenly talisman that Han Li had set up earlier. In the instant that sacred ancestor Zhu Guang discovered this, a vast expanse of light had already descended from above to ensnare the crimson canoe. In response, the final clone on the canoe hurled his rainbow pagoda through the air again. A giant pagoda projection instantly appeared overhead, keeping the palaces and pavilions at bay and preventing them from being able to descend any further. Immediately thereafter, the clone began to chant something before expelling a mouthful of blood essence, then yelled the word capture. Rainbow light instantly swept upward from the tip of the pagoda, sweeping up all of the palaces and pavilions. The light faded, and the giant pagoda projection vanished as the small rainbow pagoda returned to the clone's hand. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's heart immediately eased upon seeing this, and he spurred on the crimson canoe to continue traveling forward. Over at Heavenly City, all of the restrictions outside the city wall had finally been destroyed by the devilish army, and countless devilish cavaliers and devilish beasts were flooding into the city. However, the 108 golden-armored warriors continued to hover in midair in a stationary manner. It turned out that they were mere projections that had been conjured up by a series of intricate formations. The human army had discovered this not long ago, and morale naturally plummeted once again as everyone fled for their lives. At this moment, on a nameless mountain hundreds of kilometers away from Heavenly City, there were close to 1,000 people in identical attire casting their eyes toward Heavenly City, which had been inundated by devilish chi. Some of them wore grief-stricken expressions, while others were happy to just be alive. None of them uttered a single word, and it seemed that this was quite an organized and well-trained group. Standing in front of them was an azure-robed middle-aged man, and he was also appraising Heavenly City with a complex expression. He was none other than one of the grand elders of Heavenly City, Master Azure Dragon. "Let's go, there's no saving Heavenly City at this point. You are the seeds of our 4 sects. As long as Deep Heaven City can withstand the devilish tribulation, our 4 sects will rise again someday," Master Azure Dragon said in a solemn voice as he turned to the group of cultivators before him. Just as Master Azure Dragon was departing from Heavenly City with the best disciples of the 4 major sects using a secret formation, Han Li had fallen into a very perilous situation. He was astonished to sense that his armor origin talismans and 9 palaces heavenly talisman had all been quickly destroyed by his pursuer, and his heart sank even further. Han Li hadn't expected to completely trap sacred ancestor Zhu Guang with those talismans, but never did he think that they would fail to stall him for even a short time. Furthermore, both of these talismans had been destroyed virtually in the instant that they had been activated, Even Han Li wouldn't be capable of something like this. This meant that this clone of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang that he was being pursued by was more powerful than him, and even if he were to use his most powerful trump cards, his chances of securing victory still definitely wouldn't exceed 50%. As such, Han Li was naturally unwilling to engage his pursuer in direct battle. After all, defeat would result in death for him, and even if he were to win, he would only be ridding sacred ancestor Zhu Guang of a clone. This was naturally not a trade that he was willing to take. Thus, after realizing that his pursuer was far more powerful than he had imagined, he immediately began to ponder strategies that would allow him to escape. He didn't know what sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's sensory range was, but with the fearsome spiritual sense that grand ascension cultivators possessed, there was definitely no chance for him to escape sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's tracking, unless he could somehow open up a distance of tens of thousands of kilometers between them. However, with how comparable their speeds were, there was no feasible way for Han Li to open up that much distance between them. Unbeknownst to Han Li, sacred ancestor Zhu Guang was also extremely stunned by this situation. The crimson canoe he was using was a vastly renowned flying treasure in the Elder Devil realm, and at its top speed, it could even keep up with a grand ascension stage being. Due to the fact that this was a clone as opposed to his true body, he was unable to push the canoe to its top speed, but it was definitely still traveling far faster than a normal body integration cultivator. However, even after pursuing Han Li for such a long time, he still hadn't managed to close down the distance between them by much. Thankfully, there were 3 of them, and they could take turns to drive the canoe on a rotating basis, so they didn't have to worry about exhausting their magic power. As such, even though the 3 of them were quite frustrated by this lengthy chase, they were still quite calm and confident. In contrast, Han Li was naturally unable to keep this up for too long. Maintaining his Tian Peng transformation and thunderstorm wings while flying at top speed was depleting his magic power at a rapid rate, and at his cultivation base, his magic power regeneration pills were no longer all that effective. At this rate, even if he were to constantly take pills and absorb spiritual power from top-grade spirit stones, his magic power would still be completely exhausted in 5 to 6 days at most. As such, this was quite a concerning situation for Han Li. All of a sudden, a thought occurred to Han Li, and his eyes immediately lit up. Now that I think about it, sacred ancestor Zhu Guang is pursuing me for that devil sealing lock, so if I'm willing to discard this treasure, I may be able to shake him off my tail. However, his brows then furrowed slightly in hesitation. This was an incomplete profound heavenly treasure, and if Qigong hadn't been lying to him, then the chaotic yin-yang qi that he could secure using this treasure would be immensely beneficial to him. As such, he was naturally very reluctant to relinquish it. Of course, his life was more important than this treasure, but he still wasn't in a completely dire situation yet, so he naturally didn't want to give up on such a precious treasure prematurely. A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face as he pondered his current situation, and another thought suddenly occurred to him. 2 identical nascent souls, one golden and one black, suddenly emerged from Han Li's body amid a flash of light. The golden nascent soul was shimmering with golden light that was tinged with faint hints of azure, and upon closer inspection, one would discover that the protective spiritual light around it was constantly transitioning between gold and azure in color. As for the black nascent soul, it had a cloud of extremely dense devilish qi around it. The golden nascent soul opened its mouth to expel a dozen or so 5-colored beads, which began to revolve around its body. Meanwhile, the black nascent soul lowered its head and made a hand seal while chanting an incantation. The 5-colored beads around it instantly transformed into 5-colored eyes, which released thin beams of light that vanished into the black nascent soul's body in a flash. The golden nascent soul's eyes lit up upon seeing this, and it instantly made a grabbing motion with one of its chubby little hands. All of a sudden, a shimmering golden brick emerged, and the golden nascent soul pointed a finger toward the brick, upon which countless arcs of lightning were stripped away from the surface of the golden brick amid a string of loud crackling. In the blink of an eye, a white wooden box that was inscribed with golden and silver runes had emerged. This was none other than the devil sealing lock. As soon as the devil sealing lock appeared, the black nascent soul shot forth into the wooden box as a streak of black light. In the next instant, Han Li appeared in the air above a grassland that resembled a green ocean. It's still the same place as last time, Han Li murmured to himself as he looked around with blue light flashing in his eyes. As soon as his voice trailed off, a green-robed elderly man appeared in midair, and he smiled as he said, "Of course, did you think I was lying to you, fellow Taoist? If you're able to break these final few restrictions, I would be more than happy to receive your assistance." Han Li wasn't surprised by the elderly man's sudden emergence at all, and he replied in an indifferent manner, "If it weren't for the fact that entering the devil's sealing lock could result in the destruction of this spiritual sense clone of mine, I really would be very interested to see the true interior of this devil's sealing lock. Even I was trapped in there for so many years. There's no way your spiritual sense clone would be able to escape if it enters that space. All right, let's do away with all the errant chatter. Have you come in here to give me your reply to the collaboration I proposed last time?" Qi cut straight to the chase. "I'm naturally extremely tempted by the prospect of being able to secure chaotic yin-yang qi, but I'm here for another reason," Han Li replied with a shake of his head. Qi was very disappointed to hear this, and his expression darkened as he said, "I don't want to discuss any matters outside of that." "Oh, so you aren't even interested in a matter concerning sacred ancestor Zhu Guang?" Han Li asked with a smile. Qi faltered slightly before asking in a serious manner, "Zhu Guang, what do you mean by that? Have you met him?" "I haven't met his true body, but I'm currently being pursued by one of his clones. This clone is more powerful than I am, and I wanted to ask you for advice," Han Li explained. Qi was rather taken aback to hear this, but he chuckled coldly. "So you're being pursued by a mere clone. Why should I save you? Of course, you can choose not to help me, but in order to ensure my own survival, I may have to abandon the devil's sealing lock. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang is most likely pursuing me for this treasure, so if I no longer have it, then he won't have any reason to continue to pursue me," Han Li said in a composed manner. Qi immediately flared up with rage. "Are you threatening me? Don't forget that you killed 3 of Zhu Guang's subordinates to get this devil's sealing lock. Do you really think Zhu Guang will just let you get away? Even if you give up this treasure, you'll definitely still be killed. I won't know if I'll succeed unless I try. Of course, if you're willing to offer me some guidance, then I won't have to do that. I'm sure you wouldn't want this treasure to fall into sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's hands again, would you?" Han Li asked with a hint of a smile on his face. Qi expression darkened even further at the sight of Han Li's composed display, and he began to contemplate the situation in a brooding silence. Han Li merely waited patiently and seemed to be in no rush at all. After a long while, Qi finally broke the silence. "HMPH, how do you know that I'll be able to help you? I do know about some of Zhu Guang's abilities, but it's been many years since we last met, so perhaps the same methods that I used against him in the past will no longer be applicable. Perhaps sacred ancestor Zhu Guang may have attained some new abilities, but this is still only a clone of his after all. I'm not actually fearful of this clone. It's just that he's carrying 2 extremely powerful treasures that pose a very serious threat to me. As long as you can tell me a way to counter those 2 treasures, I'll be able to take care of the rest on my own," Han Li said with a smile. "2 treasures? Are you referring to the 2 incomplete profound heavenly treasures, the purple word cauldron and the rainbow light pagoda?" Qi asked. "The 2 treasures are indeed comprised of a small purple cauldron and a rainbow pagoda." Han Li had already guessed this to be the case, but he was still quite stunned upon hearing confirmation from Qi that these 2 treasures were incomplete profound heavenly treasures. "So it really is those 2 treasures. I do indeed have a way to counter those 2 treasures, and if you're lucky, you may even be able to take one of them for yourself," Qi said as a peculiar look appeared on his face. Han Li was rather taken aback to hear this, following which a skeptical look appeared on his face. "Is that true? If I'm not mistaken, sacred ancestor Zhu Guang has refined both of these treasures to become part of his body. How will I be able to take one of them? I haven't told you this before, but among those 2 treasures, the purple word cauldron used to belong to me," Qi said in a meaningful voice as he stroked his own beard. Han Li was naturally quite stunned to hear this. A cold light surfaced in Qi eyes as he continued, "HMPH, I fell prey to Zhu Guang's machinations, and I was only able to escape from him after my soul hid itself within this devil's sealing lock. However, both my physical body and my purple word cauldron fell into his hands. He spent over 100 years to refine the spiritual sense that I had left in the cauldron, then refined the treasure to claim ownership over it. But what he didn't know is that I had actually left 2 types of spiritual sense within the cauldron, one of which was hidden while the other was out in the open. As long as he hasn't discovered that wisp of hidden spiritual sense, there's a good chance that you'll be able to take the treasure from him. In that case, there really is a chance that this could work. What chance do you think we have of pulling this off, Senior? Hanli asked in a cautious manner. I specially refined that wisp of spiritual sense precisely for a situation like this one. As long as Zhu Guang hasn't discovered it yet, there's at least a 50% chance that you'll be able to take the treasure from him. Even if you can't take the cauldron from him, if you do as I say, you'll be able to significantly weaken the treasure so that it no longer poses any threat to you, Qi Gong replied in a confident voice. Han Li nodded in response before continuing. It does sound like it's worth giving this a try. Do you have any countermeasures against the Rainbow Light Pagoda as well, Senior? Compared to the Purple Word Cauldron, I'm more concerned about that treasure. The Rainbow Light Pagoda never belonged to me, but it's a vastly renowned, incomplete, profound, heavenly treasure in our sacred realm. I've seen it a few times, and it is indeed extremely powerful. Even if I were to go up against it in person, there's very little chance that I'll be able to counter it, Qi Gong said as a grim look appeared on his face. Han Li's heart sank upon hearing this. Does that mean there's no way to counter the treasure? Indeed, I don't have any way directly oppose the Rainbow Light Pagoda's powers, but I know of a way that can help you stall for time against it. As long as you can take advantage of the opportunity to claim the Purple Word Cauldron, then use the cauldron against the Rainbow Light Pagoda, you should be able to at least ensure self-preservation, Qi Gong replied. Han Li thought about this for a moment before cupping his fist in a salute. Please enlighten me then, Senior. Do you really think I'll divulge this information to you free of charge? Qi Gong chuckled with a roll of his eyes. Han Li's expression remained unchanged upon hearing this, seemingly having already predicted that this caveat would arise. What are your intentions, Senior? It's very simple. You just have to agree to the deal I proposed last time, and I'll tell you everything you need to know, Qi Gong replied without any hesitation. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly upon hearing this, and only after a short while did he continue. In that case, please specify the conditions. I left too abruptly last time and didn't get a chance to hear your conditions. An elated look appeared on Qi Gong's face for the first time upon hearing this, and he replied, Rest assured, I'm not an unreasonable person. The deal that I propose will benefit you greatly as well. I'll be happy to hear it then. Han Li's expression remained unchanged, but he naturally wasn't going to just believe what Qi Gong said to be true. My first condition is that after you escape from Zhu Guang, you must immediately make a trip to the place with earthly hellish flames nearby, and use those flames to extract some of the chaotic yin-yang qi within this devil's sealing lock. When that time comes, I'll disclose to you the method to extract the chaotic yin-yang qi, but you have to split me a third of it, Qi Gong said in a serious voice. How will you be able to receive the chaotic yin-yang qi when you're trapped in this place? Han Li asked. You don't need to worry about that. I may be trapped here in this devil's sealing lock, but I have my ways. You just have to tell me whether you agree to that condition, Qi Gong replied. Han Li contemplated the condition for a short while before nodding in response. A third is a reasonable amount to ask for, so I'll agree to this condition. In that case, the second condition is even simpler, and you may or may not even have to complete it. I can see that you seem to be quite powerful among body integration stage beings. Perhaps you'll be able to progress to the Grand Ascension stage someday. Hence, all I want is a promise from you. If you do reach that level and are capable of doing so, kill Zhu Guang for me, Qi Gong said with a nonchalant smile. Surely you jest, Senior. How could I possibly be capable of killing a Grand Ascension stage being? Besides, even if I do reach the Grand Ascension stage someday, Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang will most likely already be back in your Elder Devil realm. Do you expect me to venture into the Elder Devil realm to hunt him down? Han Li immediately refused as he shook his head vigorously. Don't be in such a hurry to turn me down. I won't force you to complete this condition, and I certainly won't expect you to venture into our sacred realm. All I want is a promise from you that you'll complete this condition when all the circumstances are in your favor. If such a situation never eventuates, then we can scrap this condition, Qi Gong urged with a wry smile. Han Li contemplated this condition for a long while before finally agreeing. In that case, I make such a promise. I hereby swear upon my inner demons that if a situation arises where I'll be able to kill Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang with ease, then I'll definitely. The higher one's cultivation base was, the more binding an inner demon vow became. After all, No one wanted to suffer inner demon backlash when attempting to break through a bottleneck. A pleased look appeared on Qigong's face upon seeing this, but that was quickly replaced by a serious expression. I can disclose to you the method to oppose the rainbow light pagoda, as well as the secret technique to trigger my spiritual sense in the purple word cauldron, but I'll be withholding the method for extracting chaotic yin-yang qi until we get to the place where earthly hellish flames can be found. Once I receive my share of the chaotic yin-yang qi, I'll tell you the method to refine it. Do you have any objections to this, fellow Taoist Han? Is there a special refinement method for this chaotic yin-yang qi? Han Li asked in a slightly surprised manner. Of course. Do you think chaotic yin-yang qi can be refined through conventional methods? I don't mean to boast, but even among all of the sacred ancestors of our sacred realm, there are definitely no more than 3 who are aware of this special refinement method, Qigong said with a proud expression. Han Li considered these conditions for a long while before finally nodding in a slightly resigned manner. We'll do as you say, then. That clone of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang isn't far away from me. I'll travel to the place where earthly hellish flames can be found as soon as I shake him off. You've made a wise decision, fellow Taoist Han. This is a jade slip that I've just prepared. It contains the aforementioned information that you require. You won't be able to take this item out of the devil's sealing lock, so memorize the information here, Qigong said with a smile as he swept a sleeve through the air, sending an inky black jade slip flying directly toward Han Li. Thank you, Senior. Han Li drew the jade slip into his own grasp, then placed it against his own head to inspect its contents in silence. Qigong merely stood on the spot and waited patiently. After about 10 minutes, Han Li exhaled as he removed the jade slip from his forehead, then crushed it into specks of spiritual light between his fingers. I see, so in order to counter the rainbow light pagoda, I'll have to use spatial treasures against it. I do indeed possess a few spatial treasures. Are there any requirements for the caliber of the treasures used, and will similar talismans also be able to achieve the same effect? Han Li asked. The rainbow light pagoda is an incompletely profound heavenly treasure, so the higher the caliber of the spatial treasure used, the more you'll be able to affect it. However, seeing as you're only aiming to stall for time, you should be able to detonate a spatial treasure of any caliber to produce the desired impact. A talisman that can affect the stability of space will suffice as well, Qigong replied with a smile. I see. In that case, I should be able to employ these methods to shake off that clone of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang. Oh, by the way, I almost forgot to mention that this clone is very different from a normal spiritual sense clone. Firstly, sacred ancestor Zhu Guang possessed someone to create this clone, and following the possession, the host's magic power was significantly enhanced, as was his ability to use the 2 incomplete profound heavenly treasures. On top of that, the clone was able to manifest 2 more clones and split up into 3. Do you know what kind of ability this is, Senior? Han Li asked. Qigong's smile immediately stiffened upon hearing this before being replaced by an incredulous expression. What? The clone can manifest other clones? That's impossible. There's no way that a spiritual sense clone sent to an alternate realm can accomplish something like that. I also thought that was rather strange, as there's already another clone of sacred ancestor, Zhu Guang, leading the devilish army nearby. If all of the sacred ancestors possess the ability to send such powerful spiritual sense clones into our spirit realm, then our human race would have most likely been erased long ago, Han Li said with his brows furrowed in befuddlement. The shock on Qigong's face receded, and his eyes narrowed into slits as he said, HMPH, there's definitely no way that other sacred ancestors could possess such an ability. Let me think about this. I seem to recall a similar type of ability, but I heard about it too long ago, and my memory of it is a little fuzzy. Han Li was quite elated to hear this. He hadn't actually expected that Qigong would be able to provide an answer to this question, but it appeared that he really did know something about this. It seemed that he hadn't been lying when he had proclaimed himself to be one of the oldest sacred ancestors in the Elder Devil realm. As Han Li was waiting in silence, Qigong was pondering intently and occasionally murmuring something unintelligible to himself. After a long while, Qigong finally broke the silence again. I've got it. Our sacred realm does indeed have an ancient forbidden technique passed down from ancient times that seems to be able to accomplish this. However, this forbidden technique has been lost for a very long time, and it's extremely risky to cultivate, so even back in ancient times, very few sacred ancestors would cultivate it. There are very few people in our sacred realm who currently know of this technique. I wonder how Zhu Guang managed to get his hands on it. Forbidden technique. Would you be able to elaborate on that, Senior? Han Li asked. This forbidden technique is known as the Great Soul-Splitting Technique, and it's said that it's a technique that will allow one to completely split their own spiritual sense. Each split part possesses independent will and can control a portion of that person's magic power, but their personalities will become very extreme, thereby resulting in major potential problems later on. On top of this, one could easily deplete their soul to too great an extent by using this technique. The spiritual sense clones created using this technique can't really even be referred to as clones, as every single one of them is essentially the true body. There's no hierarchical order in which they're ranked. That's the extent of my knowledge on this technique. The power of the clone depends on the number of times one's spiritual sense has been split. However, the fact that Zhu Guang is willing to send this clone into the spirit realm indicates that it can't be a very powerful one. Even so, it'll still be far more powerful than the average spiritual sense clone of a sacred ancestor, Qi said in a slow voice. I see. Are there no drawbacks to this technique that I can exploit? Han Li asked with a grim expression. The technique naturally has severe drawbacks, but all of that will come after the event. You won't really be able to exploit any of them during your battle, Qi replied with a resigned expression. In that case, I'll just have to react and adapt to the situation. I'm only planning to shake off these clones anyway. Han Li nodded in response and didn't seem to have any intention of asking further questions. Thus, he extended a slight bow toward Qi, and black light flashed from his body, upon which he vanished as a cloud of black qi. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D563, letter 1D556, letter 1D4 1E, letter 1D430, letter 1D556, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D428, letter 1D426. Qi looked on expressionlessly at the spot where Han Li had disappeared and remained hovering in the air above the grassland. All of a sudden, he said in an indifferent voice, "You've been watching for quite some time now. Isn't it about time you came out?" So you knew I was here all along." Another male voice rang out from the nearby space in response, and this also sounded like quite an elderly voice. "I was able to break through to this level of restriction, so you're naturally able to do so as well. You were already following me back when I met that human cultivator the first time, right?" Qi asked as a cold expression appeared on his face. The unfamiliar man was silent for a moment before asking, "Why bother to ask a question when you already know the answer? Are you planning to try and punish me?" "HMPH, do you think I wouldn't do that if I could?" Qi replied in a cold voice. The unfamiliar man's voice also cooled upon hearing this. "You've always been the cruelest one among us. If Zhu Guang hadn't plotted against us, you would have most likely turned on the rest of us anyway. Don't make it sound like you're some kind of saint. All of us were plotting against one another back then. Setting the past aside, that human brat is the only opportunity for me to escape from this place. If you dare to ruin this for me, then don't blame me for turning on you," Qi said in a threatening voice. "Sure, I'll stay out of this as long as you give me half of the chaotic yin-yang qi that you obtained from that human brat. In fact, not only will I not foil your plans, I'll even help you take on Zhu Guang after we get out of this place." The unfamiliar man immediately stated his own condition. "Looks like I have no choice but to agree. However, there's no way I'll be splitting you half of the chaotic yin-yang qi. A quarter is all I'm willing to give up. If you can't accept that, then so be it," Qi said in a calm manner. I'll take it. A quarter will be enough for me to ensure self-preservation and escape from this place." The unfamiliar man agreed without any hesitation. Qi expression eased slightly upon hearing this, and he continued, "In that case, once we get out of here, we'll refine this devil's sealing lock and return to our former powers, then seek out Zhu Guang for revenge. He's currently walking our old path, so he must be in his most vulnerable state right now. I find that to be quite curious. It's not like Zhu Guang hasn't experienced how dangerous this technique is in the past, yet he still dares to cultivate it again. Isn't he afraid of ending up in the same situation as he did in the past?" The unfamiliar man seemed to be very confused. "HMPH, who knows what Zhu Guang is thinking? Perhaps he's already found a way to circumvent the risk of using this technique, or perhaps he's had to cultivate it again for some other reason. In any case, he's definitely severely weakened right now, so this is the perfect opportunity for us to exact our revenge," Qi said as a hint of resentment flashed through his eyes. "It's rather implausible that he would have found a way to circumvent the risk of using that technique. There's no use speculating about it now. All will be made clear when we see Zhu Guang again." A resentful tone crept into the unfamiliar man's voice as well, and it was clear that he also harbored intense hatred towards sacred ancestor Zhu Guang. I can't wait to see the look his face when he sees us again. However, if we want that scenario to eventuate, we have to help that hand brat overcome his predicament first. If he fails to escape from that clone of Zhu Guang's, the devil's sealing lock will fall into Zhu Guang's hands again. The two of us won't be in any danger here, but there's no way we'll be able to escape, Qiqigong said with a solemn expression. Didn't you already disclose to him the method to counter those two treasures? Without the threat posed by those two treasures, that brat should be able to ensure self-preservation, the unfamiliar man said in a slow voice. There's no way we can judge that brat's powers from his spiritual sense clone alone, but seeing as he was able to take the devil's sealing lock from Zhu Guang's subordinates, I assume he's quite powerful among body integration stage beings. Qiqigong mused with furrowed brows. I certainly hope so, the unfamiliar man replied in an indifferent manner. Qiqigong shook his head with a wry smile before falling silent. Meanwhile, outside the devil's sealing lock, Han Li's golden nascent soul was still seated with its legs crossed inside the mysterious space within the giant bird. All of a sudden, black chi emerged from the surface of the wooden box, and the black nascent soul re-emerged in a flash. The nascent soul gave Han Li a smile before instantly vanishing into his golden nascent soul. The two nascent souls had combined as one, and the golden nascent soul shuddered as it hurriedly made a hand seal. A hint of discomfort flashed over its face for an instant, but its expression then immediately returned to normal. The golden nascent soul slowly opened its eyes, then murmured to itself, I see, looks like I've made the right decision to ask Qiqigong for advice. He's given me a method to counter both of those treasures. As for whether it's going to work, I'll have to try it to find out. If it fails, I'll have to abandon this devil's sealing lock or employ some other risky tactics. After contemplating the situation for a long while, a faint smile appeared on its face, and it exploded into specks of golden light. 4 hours later, Han Li caught sight of a completely bleak and barren plain in the distance. His eyes immediately lit up, and he raised his beak to let loose a long cry before suddenly withdrawing his wings and reverted back to his human form amid a flash of bright spiritual light. After taking a glance at the plain in the distance, then turning to look behind himself, he immediately swept both sleeves through the air to release 72 small azure swords, which transformed into hundreds of streaks of azure sword chi that began to revolve around him. After that, he made a hand seal, and a layer of azure light appeared over his body, following which all of the streaks of sword chi suddenly vanished into the nearby space. In the next instant, hundreds of azure pillars of light erupted out of the surrounding area to form a massive sword formation. This was none other than the final sword formation of the Azure Essence sword art, the Azure Coil sword formation. The sword formation had been bestowed upon Han Li by Qing Yuanzi, and he had later incorporated elements of his sword observation art into it to further enhance its powers. It had been very effective against the devilish lord, Fei Ya, but as for how effective it would be against his pursuer, that was yet to be seen. Of course, seeing as Han Li was preparing to make a stand, he naturally couldn't just use a single ability. After he had set up the sword formation, he immediately released 2 figures out of his own body, one of which was golden while the other was azure. They were none other than the Provenance golden body and the green-skinned spirit body. After that, he flipped a hand over to produce a purple blade segment, which he immediately tossed toward the golden body. The eyes on the center head of the golden body sprang open, and it drew the blade segment into its grasp. The golden body gently waved the blade segment through the air, and it instantly vanished amid a flash of piercing purple light. Only in the hands of the golden body was this blade segment able to unleash the power of laws of heaven and earth. Immediately thereafter, Han Li laid a hand onto his own storage bracelet and released several treasures at once, all of which flew directly toward the spirit body. The treasures were comprised of jade pendants or flags, and there was even a ring among them. Following a brief hesitation, a solemn look appeared on Han Li's face, and he tossed a scroll toward the spirit body as well. The spirit body remained completely expressionless and merely opened its mouth to swallow all of the items that had been tossed toward it. After that, it and the golden body made hand seals in unison, and they both vanished into thin air. After doing all that, Han Li rotated on the spot, and hundreds of formation flags and formation plates erupted out of his body before flying through the air and setting up 5 or 6 similar temporary formations near the sword formation. He then swept both sleeves up into the air to release several hundred talismans, all of which disappeared into the space overhead in a flash. After that, 13 balls of purple light emerged from one of his sleeves, before transforming into the 13 purple-striped gold devouring beetles. Finally, he produced a fist-sized white crystal ball, which he expelled a mouthful of blood essence toward. The ball of blood essence transformed into a cloud of blood mist that instantly vanished into the crystal ball, which then immediately took on a crimson color. Hanli tossed the crystal ball forward before flicking his fingers toward it while chanting something, and incantation seals of different colors flooded into the crystal ball in a frenzy, causing it to radiate a peculiar spiritual light. All of a sudden, the crimson light within the crystal ball transformed into an unidentifiable crimson rune, and Hanli exhaled and swept a sleeve toward it, stowing it away amid a flash of azure light. After standing in silence for a moment, Hanli suddenly stroked a section of his arm, where a mysterious pattern was imprinted, and a wry smile appeared on his face after drawing no reaction from that pattern. Having set up all of these preparatory measures, Hanli then transformed into a giant golden ape that was over 1,000 feet tall amid a flash of golden light, then stood with his arms crossed at the center of the sword formation and cast his gaze into the distance with a cold expression. Moments later, a rumbling voice rang out from the distance, "So you finally decided to stop running." Immediately thereafter, crimson light flashed, and a small crimson canoe shot forth toward Hanli as a crimson thread. After the span of just a few breaths, the crimson thread appeared in the air near Hanli before reverting back to its canoe form. The three identical young men on the canoe cast their eyes toward Hanli in unison. The young man at the forefront wore a cold, mocking smile, while the two behind him were appraising Hanli in an expressionless manner, but their eyes were as sharp as daggers. "You're a quick little rat, I'll give you that. Are you planning to make a final stand here? Do you really think a sword formation and a few temporary formations will be able to save you?" The young man at the forefront chuckled. "I won't know until I try. Surely you won't expect me to just hand myself over to you." Hanli chortled as he made a grabbing motion with both hands, and spatial fluctuations erupted in the air above the canoe, following which two giant hands, one black and one white, suddenly emerged. The black hand was radiating boundless gray light, while the white hand had 5-colored glacial flames burning all around it, and both of them came crashing down with devastating might. "HMPH, how insolent!" the young man at the forefront said in an arrogant manner before making a hand seal, and a burst of black chi erupted behind him. Two gray feelers then sprang out of the black chi before thrusting directly toward the pair of massive hands. The feelers struck the giant hands like a pair of iron spears, and in the instant that the two clashed, the pair of massive hands exploded like balloons before disintegrating into specks of spiritual light. However, the divine essence-effused light and 5-colored glacial flames imbued within the two hands continued to sweep down from above. As a result, one of the feelers was frozen into a translucent pillar of ice, while the other was shattered amid a few violent flashes of gray light. Divine essence-effused light, eh? That's very rare," the young man at the forefront remarked in a slightly taken-aback manner. A cold smile appeared on Hanli's face as he said, "Do you really think a mere clone like you is enough to force me to flee for my life? I was only trying to distance myself from your subordinates." "Oh, you seem very confident. Does your confidence stem from those two that are hiding in the shadows?" The young man at the forefront chuckled coldly. Almost at the exact same moment, the two clones behind him suddenly sprang into action. One of them opened his mouth to expel a ball of black light, which instantly transformed into a small cauldron, and a black pillar of light suddenly erupted out of the cauldron's opening. Meanwhile, the other clone made a grabbing motion, and an indistinct rainbow pagoda projection emerged before flying through the air. The two treasures were both attacking what appeared to be patches of empty air. A pair of resounding booms rang out, and two figures emerged out of thin air amid busts of spatial fluctuations. One of them was a shimmering golden figure with 3 heads and 6 arms, while the other was the green-skinned Hanli, and they were preparing to stealthily approach the small crimson canoe. Hanli's expression immediately darkened upon seeing this. A peculiar look appeared on sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's face as he caught sight of the golden body. "That's a true devil projection. How interesting, to think that a human was able to hone a true devil cultivation art to such an extent. I wonder what those old geezers will think if they were to hear of this." He chuckled with both a hint of mockery and self-deprecation in his voice. Han Li wasn't overly surprised to hear this. After all, even though he had altered the Provenance True Devil arts significantly, the Provenance True Devil projection had a very distinct form, so anyone who was well-versed in devilish arts would be able to identify its origins right away. Of course, there were very few human devil Dao cultivators who would have mastered a devilish cultivation art to this extent, so under normal circumstances, Han reflexively refrained from using this golden body. However, now that he was facing this clone of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang, he naturally wasn't going to hold back anything. He cast his gaze toward the purple word cauldron, seemingly in a nonchalant manner, and he was already beginning to chant something internally. At the same time, the crystal ball that contained the crimson rune emerged silently within one of his huge furry hands. As he began to use the secret technique, the rune within the crystal ball began to flash, as if it had sprung to life. Meanwhile, sacred ancestor Zhu Guang was appraising the golden body and spirit body, and he also seemed to be contemplating something. However, in the next instant, he suddenly seemed to have sensed something, and his expression changed drastically as he yelled, "How dare you try to play these tricks right under my nose? Die!" As soon as his voice trailed off, a projection with a giant horn on its head and a dozen or so massive feelers suddenly emerged behind him. The feelers were slightly blurry and indistinct, but as soon as they appeared, they swept violently through the air, covering a distance of several thousand feet in a flash before lashing out at Han Li from afar. "HMPH, it's too late for you to do anything now." Han Li harumphed coldly before crushing the crystal ball in his hand into a ball of piercing light. The crimson rune flashed once, then vanished into the palm of his hand. At the same time, a dozen or so azure lotus flowers suddenly appeared around Han Li. Each flower was around a foot in size, and their petals were peerlessly sharp. The tentacles clashed directly with the lotus flowers, and the latter rotated on the spot, releasing countless streaks of sword chi that instantly shredded the feelers into countless tiny segments. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang chuckled coldly upon seeing this, yet just as he was about to unleash another ability, a cry of surprise suddenly rang out from behind him, followed by a piercing screeching sound. He hurriedly turned around, just in time to see the purple word cauldron fly out of the grasp of one of the clones behind him. The clone that had been controlling the cauldron was completely stunned by this turn of events, but he reacted very quickly, making a grabbing motion to conjure up a giant claw projection that encompassed around an entire acre of space down below. It seemed that there was no way that the purple word cauldron would be able to escape. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang was quite relieved to see this, yet before he had a chance to think about why this had happened, the giant golden ape down below suddenly thumped its own chest violently and let loose a thunderous roar. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's body swayed involuntarily upon hearing this roar, and his face suddenly paled slightly. The clone that was grabbing toward the purple word cauldron also shuddered, and the massive hand he had conjured up instantly crumbled away into nothingness. The purple word cauldron instantly flew away as a streak of purple light, and it was truly about to escape. "Stop that thing!" Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang yelled with fury and urgency in his voice. The final clone on the canoe raised an eyebrow upon hearing this before tossing the small pagoda in his hand through the air. Rainbow light flashed, and the small pagoda instantly released a burst of mysterious power that swept toward the small cauldron. However, almost at the exact same moment, Han Li's spirit body suddenly opened its mouth to expel a ball of white light, within which was a ring, and it quickly pointed a finger toward the ring. The ring abruptly exploded at its behest, and a burst of feeble spatial power immediately surged through the air. The power released by the small pagoda was affected by this burst of spatial power, and it was diverted away from the purple word cauldron. Thus, the small cauldron was able to continue to fly away. The clone of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang that was originally controlling the cauldron stomped a foot down in an urgent manner and instantly propelled itself through the air, setting off in pursuit as a streak of crimson light. "How dare you tamper with my treasure like this? I'm going to extract your soul and torture you for the rest of eternity," sacred ancestor Zhu Guang roared in a furious manner. He then quickly made a hand seal, and the devilish projection behind him let loose an earth-shattering roar before opening its mouth to expel a torrent of blood. 1. The blood was extremely pungent, and there seemed to be no end to it as it formed a sea of blood in the nearby space, then crashed directly toward Han Li as a massive wave at the behest of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang. Han Li's heart stirred upon seeing this, and he immediately made a hand seal to activate the temporary formations he had set up nearby. A series of light formations emerged around the sword formation, and layers of light barriers appeared alongside clouds of mist of different colors to completely inundate the giant ape. At this point, the small crimson canoe was already floating on a boundless sea of blood. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang chuckled coldly at the sight of the defensive measures Han Li was adopting, and he swept both of his sleeves toward Han Li in unison. The sea of blood beneath him immediately rose up as a giant wave that was several hundred feet tall before sweeping toward Han Li with devastating might. The temporary formations clashed with the massive wave, and all of the light and mist that had been released by the formations were instantly destroyed, as if they had encountered the bane of their existence. Even the formations themselves crumpled like papier-mâché structures in the face of the wave of blood. The gigantic wave then surged toward the center of the sword formation, upon which streaks of azure sword chi emerged to form an azure wall, which stopped the wave of blood cold in its tracks. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang was quite surprised to see this. This sea of blood was something that he had refined using an extremely poisonous substance from the Elder Devil realm, and it was capable of instantly reducing everything that it came into contact with into nothingness. Due to the fact that he was a clone, the power of this ability was naturally greatly hampered, but it still should have been able to crush all cultivators below the Grand Ascension stage. As such, it came as quite a shock to him that Han Li had managed to keep the attack at bay so easily. The streaks of azure sword chi that emerged out of the sword formation seemed to be very ordinary, but the sea of blood was completely ineffective against them. Of course, as a Grand Ascension cultivator, sacred ancestor Zhu Guang naturally had more tricks up his sleeve. Seeing as this wave of blood wasn't achieving the desired effect, he immediately made a hand seal before pointing a finger at the sea of blood around him, and hundreds of fist-sized balls of blood instantly took shape around him. These balls of blood then transformed into winged crimson silkworms that pounced directly toward the barrier formed by azure sword chi. Han Li's pupils contracted upon seeing this, and a five-clawed azure dragon suddenly sprang out of the azure sword barrier at his behest. The dragon let loose a thunderous roar and opened its mouth to expel a barrage of sword chi that tore all of the crimson silkworms into shreds. However, in the next instant, a wave of blood washed over these dismembered silkworms, and they instantly regenerated before continuing to fly onward as if nothing had happened. As they approached the azure barrier, they opened their mouths to expel translucent crimson threads that were as thin as strands of hair, but a crisp clattering sound rang out when they struck the sword barrier. Countless streaks of sword chi clashed with the crimson threads, and not only were the latter not torn into shreds by the sword chi, they became extremely viscous instead and bound themselves to the sword chi. Meanwhile, the silkworms that had released these crimson threads suddenly spread their wings before flying back in retreat, following which the hundreds of crimson threads clumped together to trap a portion of the sword chi. As a result, a gap was opened up in the azure light barrier, and sacred ancestor Zhu Guang immediately directed another giant crimson wave toward that gap. However, right at this moment, a dragon's roar rang out from within the azure light barrier, and a huge dragon's head emerged from the opening before blasting forth a thick pillar of light out of its mouth. The wave of blood clashed with the pillar of light amid a deafening boom, and the two seemed to be evenly matched. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's expression darkened upon seeing this, and he let loose a long cry, upon which another gigantic wave of blood was swept up before hurtling toward the sword formation. It was as if he were attempting to inundate the entire sword formation with this sea of blood. In response, the azure light barrier parted, and a five-clawed azure dragon completely emerged. It thrashed violently, and countless azure lotus flowers appeared out of thin air to keep the sea of blood at bay. Meanwhile, Han Li paid no heed to this at all, and was appraising the clone holding the small rainbow pagoda instead. The disruptive spatial fluctuations released by the ring treasure that had been detonated was about to subside, and that would allow the rainbow light pagoda to function as normal again. He had been able to detonate a low-grade spatial treasure to disrupt the rainbow light pagoda, but that was clearly not a sustainable tactic, and he didn't know whether it would work a second time. As such, not only were Han Li and his spirit body appraising this clone with rapt focus, even the Provenance golden body was keeping an eye on him as well. Sure enough, in the instant that the final traces of chaotic spatial fluctuations subsided, the clone that was holding the small pagoda immediately sprang into action. He suddenly laid a hand onto the pagoda to release a burst of rainbow light, following which he abruptly vanished in a flash. The Provenant's golden body abruptly opened all 6 of its eyes to release a layer of golden flames all over its body to protect itself, and at the same time, the spirit body made a hand seal to expel countless green threads out of its body. Green light flashed, and these green threads manifested a suit of green armor. This was a tight-fitting suit of armor that appeared over the upper body of the green-skinned Han Li, and there were extremely intricate and beautiful patterns engraved on its surface. Just as both the golden body and spirit body were preparing to defend themselves, the clone that was controlling the small pagoda suddenly appeared in the air directly above the sword formation, then immediately flipped his hand over. The rainbow pagoda was tipped upside down, and a giant pagoda projection emerged before descending without any warning. A burst of powerful spatial fluctuations instantly enveloped the entire sword formation, immediately following which these fluctuations transformed into a wave of rainbow light. In the instant that these fluctuations emerged, Han Li immediately sensed them, and he looked up before waving a giant furry hand up into the air without any hesitation. Even higher up in the air, a resounding boom rang out alongside an eruption of piercing light, and a series of palatial projections appeared before also descending from above. Meanwhile, the Provenant's golden body and the spirit body had also sprung into action in unison. The spirit body raised a hand to release a ball of red light, which vanished into space in a flash. At the same time, the Provenant's golden body disappeared on the spot as a gust of golden wind. In the next instant, fierce winds were swept up above the small crimson canoe, and the Provenant's golden body abruptly re-emerged. It swung its 6 arms through the air, and 6 head-sized balls of golden light shot forth at once, then fused as one to form a golden vortex with a radius of several tens of feet. The vortex exerted a burst of enormous suction force toward the canoe down below, causing it to fly involuntarily toward it as a streak of crimson light. Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang immediately made a hand seal upon seeing this, and the giant devilish projection behind him raised its head before letting loose a thunderous roar. As it did so, its body swelled drastically to over 1,000 feet tall, and its dozen or so feelers pierced up into the air at once. The feelers converged in midair and fused as one to form a giant gray spear, which stabbed viciously into the center of the golden vortex. An earth-shattering boom rang out as the rotation of the golden vortex decelerated slightly. Immediately thereafter, the giant gray spear pierced through the vortex and continued on toward the Provenant's golden body with immense force. The golden body made no effort to take evasive measures upon seeing this. Instead, it conjured up a long golden blade in each of its 6 hands before slashing them toward the oncoming massive spear. A string of resounding booms rang out as the 6 blades clashed with the giant spear, only to be destroyed and exploded as balls of spiritual light. The spear then blurred before abruptly appearing in front of the golden body, following which its tip was plunged into the golden body's chest. Immortal Galaxy Tree. Now that's just gross. However, the tip of the spear only managed to pierce several inches into the golden body's body chest before being stopped cold in its tracks. At the same time, 6 golden blades appeared in the golden body's hands again before being slashed toward the massive spear. The devilish projection down below seemed to have also sensed that something was amiss, and it immediately attempted to withdraw the giant spear, but it was already too late. A layer of translucent light appeared over the surface of the Provenant's golden body, and a burst of immense suction force immediately acted upon the giant spear, thereby completely immobilizing it. Right at this moment, countless blade projections rained down from the 6 golden blades being wielded by the golden body, and the projections came crashing down in a torrential wave that threatened to inundate both the devilish projection and Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang. Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang harumphed coldly upon seeing this before taking a half-step backward, then made a strange hand seal that was accompanied by an unintelligible incantation. A buzzing sound rang out from the small canoe, and a crimson light barrier emerged to protect both Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang and the devilish projection. The blade projections rained down upon the light barrier like a violent storm, but the barrier remained completely stable and unscathed. Not only was this canoe an extremely powerful flying treasure, it also possessed incredible defensive abilities. It was no wonder that Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang was so calm and collected in the face of the Provenant's golden body's attacks. All of a sudden, the devilish projection raised its head and let loose a low roar, upon which a layer of gray light flashed over the giant spear that was immobilized against the golden body's chest. As a result, the spear softened and transformed into a gray devilish python that was several hundred feet in length. The python had an inky black horn on its head, and it lashed out with its massive body to wind itself tightly around the golden body. If a normal body integration cultivator had been caught in the python's stranglehold, their body would instantly explode. However, the Provenant's golden body was manifested from countless precious materials, and it was virtually indestructible. As such, not only did it manage to remain completely unscathed even as it was bound by the giant python, it suddenly began to expand. At the same time, the 6 golden blades it was wielding vanished in a flash, and as it waved its 6 arms through the air, countless golden fist projections were sent hurtling toward the massive python. A string of rumbling booms rang out, and the giant python also seemed to possess an extremely resolute body. Even though it was sustaining some damage from the golden fist projections, it was able to withstand the blows without too much trouble. In retaliation, it opened its mouth and expelled a burst of green chi directly toward one of the golden body's 3 heads. The green chi immediately struck the golden body with an overpowering sense of drowsiness, and the expressions on its 3 faces changed slightly as golden light suddenly flashed from its glabella. A gash was then opened up, and a 3rd vertical eye emerged. Golden light flashed, and 3 streaks of piercing golden light shot forth from within the vertical eye before passing through the green chi in a flash. Strangely enough, the green chi was completely eradicated as a result. The giant python swung its head around and attempted to chomp down viciously onto the golden body's center head, but a huge, shimmering golden hand appeared in its path before lashing out in retaliation. Thus, the golden body and the massive python began to engage in a melee brawl, and both of them possessed extremely powerful bodies, so it seemed that this was going to be quite a long battle. Meanwhile, the giant pagoda projection above the sword formation was flickering unsteadily under the influence of the 9 palaces' heavenly talisman, as well as the detonation of another low-grade spatial treasure. The rainbow light that it released was disrupted, and in the end, it fizzled out of existence before it could reach the sword formation. Similarly, the palatial projections conjured up by the 9 palaces' heavenly talismans were also affected by the pagoda's spatial powers, thereby preventing them from descending as well. Right at this moment, a peculiar light suddenly flashed through Han Li's eyes and abruptly thrust both of his palms up into the air. 2 mountains, one black and one azure, emerged out of thin air amid a pair of resounding booms. Each mountain was several hundred feet tall, and they both crashed directly toward the clone that was controlling the rainbow pagoda. Meanwhile, the spirit body swept one of its sleeves through the air to release a plume of green threads. These green threads were virtually completely transparent, and they vanished into thin air before abruptly reappearing near the small pagoda, then descended as a net of green threads. It appeared that Han Li was attempting to take this treasure as well. The clone of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang remained completely expressionless upon seeing this. He merely raised a hand toward the small pagoda that was hovering in midair and uttered the word break. The small pagoda rotated on the spot, and a gust of fierce rainbow winds erupted from within it. The oncoming green net was instantly torn apart by this gust of wind, and on top of that, the 2 extreme mountains were also blown back by over 100 feet. Immediately thereafter, the rainbow winds completely enveloped the 2 extreme mountains, following which countless mysterious golden symbols that were very familiar to Han Li appeared around the pair of mountains. "Golden seal text," Han Li exclaimed as his expression changed slightly. Immediately thereafter, a burst of mysterious power suddenly descended upon the 2 mountains, attempting to forcibly cut off his spiritual sense connection with them. If it weren't for the fact that his spiritual sense was virtually as powerful as that of a grand ascension cultivator, the connection he had with the 2 extreme mountains most likely really would have been severed. Han Li immediately let loose a roar of shock and fury as he launched his giant furry fists toward the gust of rainbow wind, and 2 giant golden fist projections emerged out of thin air before crashing heavily into the gust of wind. At the same time, a row of silver runes abruptly lit up on the extreme essence-effused mountain at his behest, and the mountain expelled a burst of gray light that swept violently toward the rainbow winds. Simultaneously, countless streaks of transparent sword chi were erupting from the other extreme mountain, and these streaks of sword chi were threatening to tear even the nearby space apart. The gust of rainbow wind was extremely powerful, But when the three powers clashed, the rainbow wind tremored violently before disintegrating into specks of piercing light amid a dull thump. Meanwhile, the two extreme mountains shot back toward Hanli, and the clone that was controlling the pagoda was quite surprised to see that it had been unable to forcibly take the two extreme mountains from Hanli. However, the hint of surprise in his eyes quickly faded, and he made a grabbing motion in an expressionless manner. Spatial fluctuations erupted, and a ball of spiritual light emerged, contained within which was the small rainbow-light pagoda. All of a sudden, a cold voice rang out from the distance. HMPH, this brat sure has some tricks up his sleeve. Don't hold back any longer. Unleash the rainbow-light pagoda's ultimate ability and kill him. Even if he detonates more spatial treasures, he won't be able to disrupt that ability. The voice belonged to none other than sacred ancestor Zhu Guang. At present, he was controlling the devilish projection behind him, as it was engaged in ferocious combat with the Provenant's golden body. But the fact that he was still able to issue instructions to his clones clearly indicated that he still had more to give. Hanli's heart stirred upon hearing this, and he let loose a thunderous roar as dazzling golden spiritual light radiated from his massive ape body. His arms blurred as he swung them through the air, flinging the two extreme mountains directly toward sacred ancestor Zhu Guang. The two mountains were extraordinarily heavy, and they had been launched by the insane strength of the giant mountain ape. All of a sudden, they vanished into thin air, then reappeared right in front of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang before crashing heavily into the crimson light barrier released by the small canoe. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's pupils contracted upon seeing this, and the giant devilish projection behind him instantly transformed into a ball of crimson light that completely enveloped his body. Two earth-shattering booms rang out, and the crimson light barrier shuddered violently before being shattered like porcelain. The two mountains continued onward and crashed right through the ball of crimson light, but sacred ancestor Zhu Guang was nowhere to be seen. In the next instant, spatial fluctuations erupted around 200 feet away, and sacred ancestor Zhu Guang re-emerged. However, he had donned a suit of gray devilish armor, and two pairs of crimson wings had appeared on his back. At the same time, a circle of 8 fist-sized azure ghostly heads had appeared around his neck. All of the ghostly heads' eyes were tightly shut, and they were extremely menacing in appearance. On top of that, their mouths were constantly opening and closing as if they were living creatures, creating quite a harrowing sight to behold. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang wore an enraged expression as he glowered at Hanli with intense resentment in his eyes. I didn't think that I would be forced to display this form to you. I must say, you've done very well. As he was glowering at Hanli, the clone that was controlling the small pagoda suddenly raised the rainbow-light pagoda high up into the air, then slowly closed his eyes and began to chant an ancient incantation. A loud buzzing sound rang out from the rainbow pagoda, and rainbow halos began to proliferate from it, quickly spreading to encompass the entire space around an acre in size in the surrounding area. As the clone's chanting quickened, a series of golden runes of different sizes also emerged from within the rainbow light, and bursts of fluctuations that were imbued with hints of the power of laws of heaven and earth began to fill the entire sky. Hanli was struck by a sense of foreboding upon seeing this, and the 13 purple-striped gold-devouring beetles that were revolving above his head instantly shot forth as balls of purple light at his behest. Meanwhile, Hanli himself stomped a foot onto space, and he pounced through the air as a gust of fierce winds, while unleashing a torrential flurry of golden fist projections. However, regardless of whether it was the purple-striped gold-devouring beetles or the fist projections, both were instantly repelled as soon as they came into contact with the rainbow halos. At this moment, the power of laws in the nearby area became even more pronounced. The dazzling light that was being released by the rainbow halos illuminated the entire sky, striking the beholder with an extremely unsettling sensation. A cold light flashed through Hanli's eyes upon seeing this, and as he continued to hurtle through the air, he let loose a ferocious roar, and his body began to expand at an incredible rate. Within mere moments, he had swelled to around 4,000 to 5,000 feet tall, and he took in a massive lungful of air before expelling a wave of white qi. Initially, the wave of qi was completely silent, but after traveling for around 100 feet, an earth-shattering boom suddenly erupted from it. The three clones felt as if an explosive thunderclap had erupted right beside their ears, and they swayed unsteadily as their bodies shuddered. The space in the wake of the white wave began to turn murky and indistinct, and there were even some sections that were twisting and warping, as if the entire space were about to collapse. This was the Golden Net Roar, a new giant mountain ape ability that Han Li had mastered after progressing to the mid-body integration stage. This was a purely soundwave-based cultivation art, and it was incredibly powerful. When unleashed to its full extent, it was capable of even shattering space itself. This was another countermeasure that Han Li had prepared against the Rainbow Light Pagoda, and in this perilous situation, he immediately chose to unleash the technique. The white sound waves and rainbow light clashed, and the former instantly vanished soundlessly into the latter. A loud buzzing sound then rang out from the rainbow light, and the golden runes hovering within the light disintegrated in a flash. The golden light itself also began to flash erratically, as if it were about to shatter at any moment. The clone that had just returned to his senses from the soundwave attack hurriedly made a hand seal upon seeing this to control the small pagoda again, but he had fallen a step behind Han Li. All of a sudden, countless silver runes appeared over the Provenant's golden body at Han Li's behest, giving it a very mystical appearance. The giant gray python pounced viciously toward it, but it abruptly vanished like a gentle breeze. Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang faltered slightly upon seeing this, but just as he was about to rush over to the massive python and unleash some kind of powerful ability to take care of the golden body, a buzzing sound suddenly rang out, and his heart stirred as he hurriedly cast his gaze toward the direction the sound was coming from. There he discovered 13 huge beetles flying directly toward him while opening their mouths to expel plumes of purple threads. These spirit insects had been instructed by Han Li to sneak over to Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang, who immediately swept a hand toward them without any hesitation. The sea of blood down below howled as a massive wave rose up right in front of Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang. However, the huge wave only managed to stop a small proportion of the purple threads expelled by the beetles, while the majority of the threads pierced directly through to the other side, then reached Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang in the blink of an eye. Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang's expression darkened upon seeing this, and the 8 azure ghostly heads hanging around his neck suddenly sprang forth amid a sharp cry. They then rotated in midair to form a huge azure ring with the 8 ghostly heads facing outward, connected by an azure halo. In the face of the oncoming purple threads, the 2 ghostly heads facing that direction instantly expelled countless silver stars. As the two clashed, the purple threads were swept up and drawn into the ghostly heads by the silver stars. On top of that, the other 6 ghostly heads were expelling countless blades of wind out of their mouths. Each blade was only around the size of a human hand, but they were remarkably dense, and they seemed to pierce directly through space before instantly striking the purple-striped gold-devouring beetles. A rapid string of crisp clangs rang out, and all of the blades of wind were repelled, while the beetles remained completely unscathed. Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang was rather stunned to see this, but he didn't falter in the slightest as he raised a hand to cast several incantation seals in succession toward the massive azure ring. The 8 ghostly heads screeched in unison, and a crimson projection erupted out of each of the heads before plunging into the swarm of purple-striped gold-devouring beetles after just a few flashes. These were 8 nude crimson ghosts with massive horns on their heads. They had green eyes and extremely sharp fingers. As they swept their arms through the air, bursts of crimson mist swept forth alongside countless claw projection, and they clashed in a ferocious manner with the beetles. During this time that Sacred Ancestor Zhu Guang was being distracted by the purple-striped gold-devouring beetles, golden light flashed from behind Han Li, and the Provenant's golden body re-emerged. Immediately thereafter, the golden body flew forward and fused as one with Han Li. Golden light swirled all over Han Li's body, and several grotesque bulges appeared below his ribs before 2 more pairs of giant furry arms suddenly emerged. At the same time, golden light flashed from his shoulders, and 2 more heads appeared, both of which were slightly smaller than the original one. Thus, the giant mountain ape had taken on a form with 3 heads and 6 arms. As soon as Han Li completed his transformation, he spread his fingers and made a grabbing motion toward the small pagoda. Faint golden light flashed from his palms, following which a mysterious silver rune appeared over each of his hands, then transformed into projections that descended from above. The nearby world's origin chi immediately began to flood toward the projections in a frenzy, and 6 bursts of mountainous force came crashing down from the heavens. In the face of these 6 bursts of tremendous force, the rainbow light began to tremor violently, then warped and elongated like a piece of dough before completely crumbling away amid a dull thump. The clone that was controlling the pagoda was very alarmed to see this, and he immediately bit through the tip of his own tongue before expelling a ball of blood essence toward the pagoda. The ball of blood essence exploded into a cloud of blood mist that enshrouded the entire pagoda, and a layer of translucent light instantly appeared over its surface. Furthermore, it was releasing a pagoda projection that seemed to be about to fly up into the heavens. However, right at this moment, Han Li suddenly let loose a loud cry before tightly clenching the fingers on his 6 hands. The mountainous force descending from above abruptly transformed into suction power, and the small pagoda was drawn involuntarily toward Han Li. The clone let loose a cry of surprise upon seeing this, and he immediately shot forth as a streak of crimson light before vanishing into the pagoda in a flash. As a result, the pagoda was instantly stabilized, but a cold smile suddenly appeared on Han Li's face as he abruptly thrust his fists downward. In contrast with his last attack, this one was completely silent, but spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted around the small rainbow pagoda, and the air became extremely viscous. A burst of invisible power had completely restricted the area around the pagoda, following which Han Li rubbed his hands together without any hesitation before sweeping them downward. A rumbling thunderclap rang out, and countless golden arcs of lightning erupted from his huge furry hands. The arcs of lightning intertwined to form a giant golden net that was around 1,000 feet in size, but it vanished into thin air as soon as it appeared. In the next instant, a thunderclap erupted near the rainbow pagoda, and the golden lightning net emerged in a flash with the pagoda right at its center. Han Li quickly made a hand seal, and the lightning net rapidly converged toward the small pagoda amid a flash of golden light. A massive golden ball instantly took shape, and the pagoda was trapped firmly within it. At the same time, spatial fluctuations erupted, and the spirit body transformed into a faint green shadow before appearing beside the golden ball, then flicked its fingers toward it in quick succession. A plume of green threads shot forth through the air, creating another layer of green threads around the golden ball, thereby instantly turning it green. In the air above, Han Li thrust his 6 hands down toward the golden ball in rapid succession, and countless runes emerged from his massive palms before flooding into the giant ball. A series of intricate and colorful formations instantly emerged on the surface of the golden ball as a result. HMPH, do you really think these little tricks of yours can trap me? An enraged voice rang out from within the ball. As soon as the voice trailed off, bursts of rumbling rang out from within the ball, and the runes on its surface began to flash erratically. At the same time, it was also bulging and collapsing in different areas in an extremely unstable manner. The outermost layer of green threads immediately began to crack, and it seemed that it would crumble away at any moment. Han Li was quite stunned to see this, and he knew that he had still underestimated the power of the Rainbow Light Pagoda. Even after implementing such a careful plan, he was still unable to truly trap it. However, the surprise on his face only appeared for an instant before it faded. He had prepared several courses of action that he could use against this treasure. Seeing as the first plan had failed, he would just have to resort to his backup plans. With that in mind, Han Li let loose a low roar as he made a grabbing motion downward with his 6 hands in unison, then abruptly swung his arms up into the air. The green ball was immediately elevated by over 10,000 feet by a burst of invisible force. Right at this moment, a faint green shadow flashed in the air above the ball. The spirit body had already arrived there in advance, and it suddenly tossed an object toward the ball with a solemn look on its face. At first glance, the object appeared to be an ordinary scroll. The scroll flew over to the air above the green ball, where it slowly unfurled to reveal a piece of artwork depicting countless golden flying swords. This was none other than the myriad sword artwork that Han Li had only completely refined not long ago. As soon as the scroll was unfurled, it released a burst of dazzling golden light alongside an astonishing baleful aura. The golden light then vanished in a flash, and the green ball in front of the artwork also disappeared. It had been drawn into the artwork. A faint smile appeared on the spirit body's face, and it made a hand seal, upon which the golden artwork slowly rolled up into the scroll again, then hovered in midair in a completely stationary manner. Han Li waved a hand upward, and a resounding boom rang out as a vast expanse of light erupted from the palatial projections up above. The light swept down toward the scroll before drawing it into the projections, following which plumes of dense white mist emerged to conceal all of the palatial projections in the air above. Meanwhile, within the restriction formed by the 9 palaces' heavenly talisman, the myriad sword artwork tremored violently, and a layer of golden light swirled around it before it slowly began to unfurl again. However, the scroll had only managed to open up halfway before a giant rainbow pagoda projection erupted out of it, and an earth-shattering boom rang out as the scroll exploded into countless specks of golden light. Immediately thereafter, a small ball of rainbow light emerged, and it was none other than the Rainbow Light Pagoda. On the surface of the pagoda, the indistinct image of a pale face could be seen. It belonged to none other than the clone of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang, who had fused as one with the pagoda. The paleness of his complexion and the furious look on his face clearly indicated that he had been forced to expend a lot of power to break out of the scroll. However, before the Rainbow Pagoda had a chance to unleash any other abilities, the specks of golden light that had erupted from the explosion suddenly became extremely bright and dazzling. A sharp ringing sound rang out, and a series of golden flying swords emerged out of thin air around the small pagoda. Each and every shimmering golden sword was of an identical length and appearance, and there was no end to them in sight. The entire area had transformed into a sea of swords, and golden light encompassed the entirety of the nearby space. The face on the small pagoda couldn't help but falter slightly upon seeing this. In the next instant, all of the flying swords let loose sharp ringing sounds, then swiveled around to direct their tips at the Rainbow Pagoda with unerring accuracy. Crab! Even the perpetually calm clone's expression changed drastically upon seeing this. Immediately thereafter, the golden flying swords in the surrounding area shot forth toward the small pagoda in a torrential storm. The rainbow light around the small pagoda did indeed possess remarkable defensive abilities, but it still immediately began to struggle in the face of so many attacks at once. Of course, the clone that had fused as one with the pagoda wasn't just going to stand by idly and watch, but in the face of this barrage of ferocious attacks, there was no time for him to unleash any other abilities. In the end, he could only inject an enormous burst of spiritual power into the Rainbow Pagoda, thereby stabilizing the layer of rainbow light again, and repelling all of the flying swords in the immediate vicinity. Letter 1D65B, Letter 1D4FB, Letter 1D486, Letter 1D4E, Letter 1D498, Letter 1D65A. Letter 1D4EC, Letter 1D490, Letter 1D662. However, there seemed to be no end to these golden flying swords. Just as the clone thought that he could take a moment to catch his breath, the next wave of flying swords arrived, and soon, the layer of rainbow light was beginning to waver again. As such, he was forced to inject magic power into the pagoda again to bolster its defenses. As a result, the small pagoda was trapped on the spot and unable to do anything aside from passively defend. And Li could sense what was happening within the restriction formed by the 9 palaces' heavenly talismans, and he was very elated by what he saw. He immediately let loose a loud roar and pounced towards sacred ancestor Zhu Guang, who was battling the 13 purple-striped gold-devouring beetles. Spiritual light flashed from the spirit body down below, and it also began to fly toward the same target. But in the next instant, a streak of crimson light suddenly appeared in the distance before approaching at a rapid speed. Within the streak of crimson light was none other than the clone of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang that had been tasked with chasing down the purple word cauldron. And Li didn't know whether the clone had managed to recover the cauldron, but he was flying directly back towards sacred ancestor Zhu Guang. Stop him! Han Li immediately issued an instruction through his spiritual sense to his spirit body upon seeing this. Thus, the spirit body instantly changed directions and flew toward the approaching clone instead. A cold light flashed through the clone's eyes upon seeing this, and he immediately flicked his fingers toward the spirit body. 10 crimson threads shot forth from his fingertips in a flash, and these crimson threads instantly transformed into thick pillars of crimson light that hurtled directly toward the spirit body. At the same time, the clone opened his mouth to expel a burst of black flames. The spirit body's powers were clearly inferior to those of the clone, but it wasn't about to back down. It also opened its mouth to expel a plume of green threads, then produced a short silver ruler with a flick of its wrist. The ruler was waved through the air, and countless silver ruler projections were instantly conjured up before surging toward the clone like a silver wave. As a result, the clone was stopped in his tracks and unable to advance any further. Meanwhile, Han Li's 3 heads had begun to chant in unison, and he swept his 6 arms through the air, releasing countless silver runes that drifted towards sacred ancestor Zhu Guang. These runes then instantly manifested into bursts of tremendous force. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang had initially thought that Han Li would be completely preoccupied with battling his clone, but much to his astonishment, Han Li had been able to trap the Rainbow Light Pagoda, as well as the clone controlling it, in that massive formation up above. Due to the fact that the three of them had been sent into an alternate realm, their powers were nowhere near those of their true body. On top of that, there were some powerful treasures that they were unable to bring into the spirit realm, but with the Rainbow Light Pagoda and Purple Word Cauldron in their arsenal, they should have been able to crush all beings below the Grand Ascension stage in the spirit realm. However, he didn't think that their primary target would be this troublesome to deal with. First, the Purple Word Cauldron had somehow escaped his control, and now, the Rainbow Light Pagoda had been completely suppressed by Han Li's spirit body. If it weren't for the fact that he could still sense that the clone controlling the Rainbow Pagoda was fine, and still had a good chance of escaping the restriction, he would have most likely already turned around and made a tactical retreat. Even so, he was still becoming a little concerned. However, now that he was being attacked by Han Li, a hint of ferocity welled up in his heart to override his worry. He immediately swept a hand through the air, and the 8 crimson ghostly projections that were battling the purple-striped gold-devouring beetles instantly vanished. The 8 azure ghostly heads then let loose ghastly howls in unison before detaching themselves from one another, then disappeared into sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's body in a flash. In the next instant, he made a hand seal, and crimson light flashed from his body as he began to swell drastically in size, transforming into a giant that was not much smaller than the massive golden ape. 8 bursts of black chi also erupted from his shoulders, following which 8 ghostly azure heads emerged. These 8 heads were each displaying a different emotion, and they were extremely harrowing to behold. The devilish giant let loose a roar of fury and swept his arms through the air like the spokes of a wagon wheel, sending countless claw projections hurtling through the air. At the same time, the 8 heads opened their mouths to expel bursts of black chi. The black chi converged in the air to form a huge black flower, which clashed with the oncoming burst of tremendous force. The giant flower shuddered before it was instantly crushed into nothingness by the enormous force, but it also nullified most of that power. The remaining force was then countered by the ferocious claw projection. A cold light flashed through Han Li's 6 eyes upon seeing this, and he suddenly let loose a thunderous roar that made the devilish giant sway unsteadily on the spot. Golden light flashed, and a sword projection that was around a foot in length suddenly appeared right in front of the devilish giant. The devilish giant was still a little dizzy, and he was quite startled by this attack, but he still reacted very quickly as his hand shot forth like lightning to make a grab for the sword projection. However, in the instant that his hand closed around the sword projection, it merely vanished as if it were nothing more than an illusion. The devilish giant naturally faltered slightly upon seeing this, yet before he had a chance to figure out what Han Li's attack was all about, the sword projection suddenly re-emerged in his spiritual sense before descending in a vicious strike. Arg! A burst of excruciating pain shot through the devilish giant's soul, and he involuntarily threw his hands over his head as he let loose a howl of agony. This was none other than an ability that Han Li had mastered from the sword observation art he had derived from the myriad sword artwork, and it specialized in targeting one's spiritual sense. Unfortunately, this was a true immortal realm cultivation art, and was not something that he could use without any consequences. As such, he was struck with a certain degree of backlash as well, and if it weren't for the fact that he had combined his golden body with his giant mountain ape form, he wouldn't have dared to use it in battle. Even so, he still gave a muffled groan as golden and silver runes flashed over his body, and he seemed to have sustained even more damage than the devilish giant. However, Han Li was prepared for this backlash, and even though his 3 heads were also struck by a burst of sharp pain, he managed to repress the pain and sprang through the air as he let loose a low roar. After just a single flash, he covered a distance of over 1,000 feet and appeared directly above the devilish giant. A long golden blade then emerged within each of his 6 hands, before being slashed viciously toward the devilish giant's main head. Golden light flashed, and the 6 golden blades instantly fused as one to create a giant sword that was several hundred feet in length. A cold light flashed through the air, and a hint of incredulity appeared on the devilish giant's main head, following which it slowly tumbled down from the devilish giant's neck. He had just been decapitated. However, Han Li didn't display any elation upon seeing this. Instead, the giant swords in his hand split up into 6 golden blades again, and he slashed them rapidly through the air, unleashing countless golden threads that threatened to tear the devilish giant into countless pieces. An incredible turn of events unfolded. The decapitated devilish giant abruptly flapped its 4 wings and shot back several hundred feet in a flash. At the same time, the sea of blood down below churned violently, and countless arrows of blood shot up into the air to keep the oncoming golden threads at bay. At the same time, a burst of black chi emerged from his neck, and a head that was identical to his original one appeared. However, one of the 8 azure ghostly heads on his shoulders had vanished. Han Li's expression darkened upon seeing this, but he didn't falter in the slightest as the 6 golden blades in his hands transformed into 6 completely different types of weapons. He swept the 6 weapons through the air, and countless bursts of golden lightning and fire swept forth in a frenzy, hurtling directly toward the devilish giant in the distance. Having just lost one of his heads, the devilish giant was also extremely enraged, and his remaining 7 heads began to chant in unison as he made an extremely profound hand seal. All of a sudden, the sea of blood down below began to rotate rapidly with the devilish giant at the center, forming a massive vortex that transformed into a gigantic pillar of blood. The pillar of blood erupted into the heavens, and the devilish giant withdrew his hand seal before grabbing toward it. Light flashed erratically from the pillar of blood, and it transformed into a giant crimson staff that was several thousand feet in length, with black runes engraved all over its surface. The devilish giant grabbed onto the staff, before immediately swinging it toward Han Li with devastating force. Countless staff projections instantly swept forth as a crimson hurricane, carrying with it a repugnant odor of blood and gore. The golden lightning and fire intertwined with the hurricane amid a string of resounding explosions, and Han Li raised all 6 of his weapons in unison before charging directly toward the devilish giant. The devilish giant harumphed coldly and also charged toward the massive ape. Thus, the 2 colossal beings clashed in a fierce battle that threatened to lay waste to heaven and earth. Not long after their battle commenced, the 13 purple-striped gold-devouring beetles and the giant gray python also joined in. That naturally made the battle even more intense, and all of a sudden, a ball of vibrant, colorful light suddenly emerged right at the center of the battlefield. Immediately thereafter, a burst of astonishing fluctuations proliferated outward in all directions, collapsing the space in its wake. 2 figures stumbled out of the ball of light before flying backward, and only when a distance of 2,000 to 3,000 feet had been opened up between them did they just barely manage to stabilize themselves. These 2 figures were naturally none other than Han Li and the devilish giant, and both of them were looking rather disheveled. Not only were there large patches of golden fur on Han Li's body that had been charred black, only 3 of his 6 weapons remained, and even those 3 weapons had been severely damaged. As for the devilish giant, his entire body was covered in blood, and 2 more of the ghostly heads on his shoulders had been destroyed. The massive crimson staff in his hand had also been snapped in half, and it seemed that the devilish giant had come off decidedly second best during that clash. Just as both Han Li and the devilish giant were appraising each other from afar with wariness in their eyes, a burst of rumbling rang out from the center of the collapsed space, and the ball of vibrant light exploded. A dozen or so balls of purple light shot forth out of the explosion, and they were none other than Han Li's purple-striped gold-devouring beetles. The giant gray python also sprang out of the explosion in another direction, but only half of its body made it out of the collapsed space before it was drawn back to its original spot by a burst of enormous suction force. Letter 1D453, letter 1D45F, letter 1D452, letter 1D626, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D452, letter 1D4B8, letter 1D630, letter 1D45A. Thus, the explosion of light completely inundated the giant python, and the devilish giant threw up a mouthful of blood essence as his face paled by a noticeable degree. The gray python was manifested from his devilish projection, and the 2 shared a spiritual connection. Now that it had been destroyed, he was suffering significant backlash. The devilish giant's expression darkened even further, while Han Li waved his 6 arms through the air to conjure up 6 different weapons again amid a flash of golden light. Each and every one of these weapons was back to their original condition, and following another flash of golden light, the charred sections of Han Li's golden fur also instantly regenerated. A ferocious look then appeared on his face as he prepared to charge toward the devilish giant again, yet right at this moment, a dull rumbling boom suddenly rang out from within the mist manifested by the Nine Palaces' heavenly talisman. At the same time, a giant rainbow pagoda projection emerged in the air above the mist, and it rotated on the spot to release countless pillars of light. The pillars of light eradicated all of the surrounding mist, and the palatial projections concealed within the mist were also pierced through before disintegrating into specks of spiritual light. Thus, the Nine Palaces' heavenly talisman was destroyed in the blink of an eye. A long streak of rainbow light then shot forth out of the giant projection before the light faded to reveal a humanoid figure. Han Li's pupils immediately contracted at the sight of this humanoid figure, while a look of elation appeared on the devilish giant's face. This was none other than the clone that had been trapped by the myriad sword artwork. At this crucial juncture, it had finally managed to break through the restriction using the incredible abilities of the Rainbow Light Pagoda. However, after Han Li caught a clear glimpse of the clone, his heart was immediately put at ease. The clone was still carrying the small Rainbow Pagoda in his hand, but his face was completely devoid of color, and his aura had also become extremely frail. Furthermore, the small pagoda in his hand had also become dull and lusterless, clearly indicating that it had lost some of its spiritual nature. The devilish giant had also noticed this, and his elated expression immediately stiffened. What happened? How did you become like this when you had the Rainbow Light Pagoda to protect you? HMPH, this brat used an extremely troublesome treasure to attack me. It seems to be a treasure from somewhere outside the spirit realm. If I hadn't used that final trump card, you most likely wouldn't ever see me again. The clone transmitted his voice to sacred ancestor Zhu Guang in response. A bewildered look appeared on the devilish giant's face, and he asked, "Something from outside the spirit realm. Setting that aside for now, will you be able to continue in this battle?" "As long as you're fine, I'll naturally be able to continue, but the Rainbow Light Pagoda has lost some of its spiritual nature, so I won't be able to use its spatial powers for now," the clone replied. "In that case, even the two of us combined won't have much of a chance of securing victory." The devilish giant's brows furrowed with indecision. The clone glanced at the giant golden ape, then cast his gaze toward the final clone, who was battling the spirit body, but remained completely silent. The spirit body was clearly inferior in power to its opponent, but it was easily able to ensure self-preservation by relying on its own incredible regenerative powers. The clone that was battling it wanted to withdraw from the battle, but was simply unable to shake off the spirit body. The devilish giant became even more hesitant upon seeing this. The situation seemed to have taken a dramatic turn for the worse for him, but he was still very reluctant to retreat. After all, he had taken a huge risk to send 3 fragments of his spiritual sense into the spirit realm at once with the sole intention of recovering the devil's sealing lock. However, not only had he failed to achieve that objective, he had lost one of his other 2 incomplete profound heavenly treasures, while the final one had had its spiritual nature damaged. This was naturally an extremely infuriating outcome for him. And Li could see the internal conflict on his opponent's face, and all 3 of his heads began to chant in unison as he made a grabbing motion with one of his 6 hands. A purple blade segment instantly appeared in his grasp, and as soon as it emerged, the nearby world's origin chi began to surge violently. At the same time, countless specks of 5-colored light appeared in the surrounding area before converging toward the blade segment in a frenzy, creating an incredible spectacle to behold. "That's an incomplete profound heavenly treasure," the devilish giant exclaimed as he stared at the shimmering blade segment with astonishment in his eyes. His other clone was also quite alarmed to see this. "Retreat," the devilish giant finally decided as his expression darkened significantly. He then flapped his 4 wings, and the sea of blood down below swept upward to form a vast expanse of crimson light, which swept up his massive body before fleeing the scene. The clone also waved the rainbow pagoda through the air, and transformed into a streak of rainbow light that flew away as well. As for the clone that was battling the spirit body in the distance, it seemed to have also received the instruction to retreat, and dazzling crimson light suddenly erupted from its body to force back the spirit body before it shot forth toward its 2 companions. The 3 of them gathered together in the blink of an eye and fled toward the same direction. "This isn't over, brat. Next time we meet, I'll be sure to extract your soul and torture it for all of eternity." Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's menacing voice rumbled in the distance, and he disappeared into the distance after just a few flashes. After making the decision to retreat, he had done so in a very decisive manner and didn't stall in the slightest. He seemed to be very confident that Han Li wouldn't try to hunt him down, and sure enough, Han Li merely looked on expressionlessly as his opponent departed, displaying no intention of setting off in pursuit. In the distance, the spirit body made a hand seal before abruptly vanishing on the spot. Spatial fluctuations then erupted beside Han Li, and the spirit body re-emerged. Han Li harumphed coldly as he withdrew his provenance golden body amid a flash of golden light. His body then shrank down as his golden fur receded, and he reverted back to his human form. As opposed to being elated by this victory, Han Li continued to look into the distance with a grim expression. Just his clones alone are already this troublesome to deal with. His true body will only be even more powerful. Grand Ascension stage beings truly are as formidable as they're proclaimed to be. Han Li murmured to himself before withdrawing his gaze and waving a hand toward the spirit body beside him. The spirit body instantly flew toward him as a green shadow before vanishing into his body in a flash, and the 13 purple-striped gold-devouring beetles also flew back to his side. Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to release a burst of azure light that stowed away the beetles, then closed his eyes before making a hand seal while chanting an incantation. A thumb-sized crimson rune surfaced on his glabella, and it was flashing with gentle light. Moments later, Han Li opened his eyes, and a hint of elation appeared on his face. It worked. The purple word cauldron hasn't traveled all that far away. As soon as his voice trailed off, he switched to a series of complex hand seals, and the crimson rune on his glabella also began to fluctuate in brightness. Letter 1D453, letter 1D45F, letter 212F, letter 1D626, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D626, letter 1D450, letter 2134, letter 1D4C2. Not long after that, a streak of black light appeared in the distance, and within it was none other than the purple word cauldron that had flown away during the battle. However, the cauldron stopped several thousand feet away from Han Li, and purple light flashed erratically from its surface as it emitted a faint buzzing sound, seemingly expressing hesitation to approach Han Li. However, after Han Li had activated that crimson rune, a connection had formed between them, and that made the cauldron unwilling to leave. The smile on Han Li's face widened at the sight of the cauldron, and the crimson rune flew directly out of his glabella before revolving around him. At the same time, he began to chant something while flicking his fingers through the air, and a series of vibrant, colorful incantation seals shot forth before vanishing into the cauldron in a flash. The small cauldron tremored before letting loose a clear cry akin to a dragon's roar, and it flew directly toward the crimson rune, which also vanished into the cauldron amid a flash of crimson light. A layer of crimson light then appeared over the surface of the cauldron, and it emitted a cry of elation. Only then did Han Li wave a hand toward the small cauldron with a smile on his face. On this occasion, the small purple cauldron was extremely obedient and voluntarily flew over to Han Li, shrinking down to several inches in size before landing on his palm. Han Li was ecstatic to see this, and he began to inspect the miniature cauldron with blue flashing within his eyes. On the surface of the cauldron were many unidentifiable runes, and it was also enveloped in a layer of faint black chi. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly as spiritual light flashed from his hand, and several golden and silver runes emerged before vanishing into the small cauldron in a flash. The cauldron only had a chance to let loose a low ringing sound before it suddenly fell completely still, seemingly having been deprived of its spiritual nature. Immediately thereafter, countless arcs of golden lightning sprang forth from Han Li's fingertips amid a rumbling thunderclap, then formed a golden lightning net that encompassed the entire cauldron. The lightning net then shrank and converged to form a small golden ball over his palm. A relieved look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he flipped his other hand over to produce a pristine white jade box, which he placed the golden ball into. After that, he swept his sleeve over the box, and a dozen or so talismans of different colors emerged before instantly forming several miniature formations that embedded themselves onto the surface of the box. After stowing the jade box away, Han Li heaved a sigh of relief, and only then did he dare to truly relax. Using the secret technique that Qigong had bestowed upon him, he was able to easily take the purple word cauldron from sacred ancestor Zhu Guang. However, the fact of the matter was that the cauldron still contained a wisp of Qigong's spiritual sense. Prior to eradicating that wisp of spiritual sense and refining the treasure again, Han Li naturally didn't dare to use it. Even so, he was still truly elated to have obtained such a precious treasure, but at the same time, he was lamenting the loss of his myriad sword artwork. He had only just completely refined the treasure, and he had planned for it to be one of his trump cards against the devilish army, so it was naturally quite unfortunate that the treasure was destroyed in just a single battle. The parting threat that the devilish giant had issued prior to his departure then surfaced in Han Li's mind, and a grim look appeared on his face. Just as the devilish giant had said, he had only been able to force these 3 clones into retreat as they were ill-prepared and overly confident, as they had 2 incomplete profound heavenly treasures up their sleeves. Next time, the 3 clones were going to be better prepared and more well-versed with Han Li's abilities, so the outcome of that battle could easily go against Han Li's favor. All of a sudden, Han Li shook his head as he chuckled to himself. He had realized that he was worried about a hypothetical situation that would never eventuate, as there was no way he would give sacred ancestor Zhu Guang another chance to trap him. If the 3 clones were to return to the main devilish city, it would take them at least 3 to 4 months, which was more than enough time for Han Li to sneak back to Deep Heaven City. As long as he didn't leave Deep Heaven City thereafter, he wouldn't have anything to fear. However, prior to that, he had to visit the place where earthly hellish flames could be found. He had sworn a vow to Qigong, and he certainly didn't want to suffer backlash from inner demons. On top of that, the chaotic yin-yang qi really was very alluring to him as well. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's clones had just retreated, so there was no way that they would return in a short time. As such, this was the perfect opportunity for him to fulfill the promise that he had made. However, that Qigong was a sacred ancestor as well, so he naturally wasn't going to believe everything that he said. He had to set up some defensive measures before he carried out the tasks that he had promised to complete. As for Heavenly City, all of the body integration cultivators had already fled, so there was no way that the city could have survived. As such, there was no point in returning to it. With that in mind, Han Li immediately made a decision and flew away as a streak of azure light. Meanwhile, the devilish giant was already tens of thousands of kilometers away, and he had reverted back to his normal humanoid form. On top of that, he had released his crimson canoe again, and the 3 clones were traveling toward Heavenly City atop the flying treasure. Along the way, all 3 clones remained completely silent. Several days later, the 3 clones caught sight of the collapsed city wall of Heavenly City. The air above the entire city had been enshrouded by inky black devilish qi, and when the crimson canoe approached the city, a group of armored warriors riding devilish steeds instantly emerged to greet the 3 clones in a respectful manner. Once the all-encompassing devilish cavalier drew a little closer, sacred ancestor Zhu Guang instructed in a cold voice, "Activate the teleportation formation closest to our sacred army right away." "Yes, sacred ancestor." All of the mid-grade and high-grade devilish beings present were already aware of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's arrival, so this all-encompassing devilish cavalier naturally recognized the 3 clones, and he immediately gave an affirmative reply with a respectful bow. Half a month later, Han Li was flying through the air as a streak of barely visible azure light. His magic power fluctuations were also extremely subdued, and no one would be able to detect the streak of azure light unless they were an extremely powerful being or possessed a spirit eye ability. Han Li was currently flying over a small human city, one that had been abandoned over 100 years ago in anticipation for the devilish tribulation. The city was currently nothing more than a conglomeration of ruins and overgrown weeds, but as Han Li was flying over it, he casually swept his spiritual sense through the abandoned city, upon which a hint of surprise appeared on his face. He abruptly drew to a halt and looked down at the abandoned city with blue light flashing through his eyes. His brows suddenly furrowed slightly, and he flew down toward a certain direction as a streak of azure light. After just a few flashes, he appeared in the air above an ordinary-looking building. There were currently 5 cultivators in different attire surrounding the building and discussing something in hushed tones, and Han Li's sudden arrival naturally gave all of them a massive fright. They reflexively summoned treasures or made hand seals as they prepared to defend themselves, but Han Li didn't even bother to take a glance at them. "Piss off." "What did you say? How dare?" "Ah, our sincerest apologies. We'll be taking our leave right away." These 5 cultivators were all at the deity transformation, and they were initially enraged by Han Li's words, but when he released his enormous body integration stage aura, all 5 of them were completely petrified and immediately backtracked before fleeing the scene. During their escape, they didn't even dare to turn around to look behind them, as if they were being pursued by a malicious ghost. Han Li cast a cold glance toward these people and hesitated momentarily, but decided not to do anything in the end. Right at this moment, an elated female voice rang out from the first floor of the building that had been surrounded. "Senior Han, I didn't expect to see you here. I'll come out to meet you right away." As soon as the voice trailed off, the front door was opened, and 3 women emerged from within the building. The first woman was tall and slender with fair snowy white skin. It was none other than Su Kainiu. "Long time no see, fellow Taoist Su," Han Li greeted with a smile. The last time they had met was when Han Li had visited the Su family, so it was quite a surprise for him to meet her again here. "Thank you for stepping in, senior. Otherwise, we would have been in deep trouble." Su Kainiu hurriedly extended a respectful curtsy toward Han Li with an elated look on her face, and the 2 women accompanying her immediately followed suit. Han Li merely waved a hand and replied in a nonchalant manner, "No need to thank me, I just so happened to be passing by." "Who were those people? Are they enemies for your Su family?" "They're just a group of scoundrels who tried to take advantage of us. You should have torn them from limb to limb, senior," a woman with an oval face behind Su Kainiu said with an enraged pout. "Shush, Xiao Qing. We're already immensely fortunate to have encountered Senior Han here. How could you be so rude? Please forgive her, Senior Han. Xiao Qing is a niece of mine, and she's always been cultivating in our Su family, so she's a little spoiled." Su Kainiu scolded with a stern expression before turning to Han Li with an apologetic look in her eyes. "Ah, please forgive me, senior. I meant no offense." The woman by the name of Xiao Qing had also realized that her words had been rather inappropriate. "That's all right, I'm not one to be bothered by minor things like this. If I had known that those people were such scummy individuals, perhaps I would have put an end to them," Han Li replied with a nonchalant smile. Su Kainiu heaved an internal sigh of relief before making an inviting hand gesture. "Thank you for your understanding, senior. Please come in and take a seat." Han Li nodded in response before making his way into the room. The devilish army was situated very far away, and he hadn't spotted any devilish beings nearby, so he wasn't concerned about any potential hazards arising. The interior of the room wasn't very large, but all of the furniture and decor gave off a unique antiquated feel, seemingly indicating that they had been around for quite a long time. However, what drew Han Li's attention the most was the barely detectable restriction fluctuations near the room. As soon as they strode into the room, those restrictions instantly vanished, and even with his spiritual sense, he was unable to detect their source. This made him rather curious. Han Li sat down on the main seat in the room, then turned toward the 3 women who were standing respectfully beside him. "This doesn't seem to be a place inhabited by mortals. Is it somehow connected to your Su family?" "Indeed, Senior Han, this is a temporary lodging place that our Su family abandoned many years ago. We were chased here by that group of cultivators and forced to make use of the restriction here to protect ourselves," Su Kainiu replied in a respectful manner. Han Li nodded in response before asking, "I see. This place is quite far away from your Su family, and I've heard your entire family has already moved to the Holy City. Why are the 3 of you here?" The 3 women exchanged a hesitant glance upon hearing this question, and in the end, a wry smile appeared on Su Kainiu's face as she replied, "Our Su family did indeed move to the Holy Sovereign City, but Mistress Blood Spirit had some important matters to attend to recently, so she left the city and took some members of our family with her. After we had taken care of those matters and were heading back to the city, we encountered a devilish army along the way, and after a fierce battle, we were defeated and forced to flee for our lives. My nieces and I were pursued by a group of devilish beings, and we had only just shaken them off when we encountered that group of cultivators." Fellow Taoist Blood Spirit left the Holy City. Han Li was rather surprised to hear this. "Indeed. Initially, the elders of our family were opposed to her departure, but she insisted on leaving, so they could only let her go," Su Kainiu replied. Instead of prying into exactly what important matters they had attended to, Han Li asked, "Are you aware of fellow Taoist Blood Spirit's current situation?" "Rest assured, Senior Han. Prior to our departure, we witnessed Mistress Blood Spirit make her escape. She was pursued by several high-grade devilish beings, but with her powers, self-preservation definitely wouldn't be an issue," Su Kainiu assured. "I see, that's good to hear. By the way, what's the situation in the Holy Sovereign City currently like? The communication between the major cities has been completely cut off by the devilish army, and even communication talismans are no longer effective," Han Li inquired. The situation is not very good. Our holy sovereign city is fine as the devilish army over there hasn't even attempted an attack on the city. However, they've targeted the human settlements around the city instead, and many of the nearby sects and major families have been wiped out. On top of that, this devilish tribulation seems to be different from all of the previous ones. The devilish army is beginning to attack mortal cities to enslave mortal humans on a wide scale. Su Kainyu replied as a concerned look appeared on her face. Han Li's expression also darkened upon hearing this, and he sighed in a grim voice. So the rumors are true. The devilish beings are planning to permanently settle in the spirit realm. Before Su Kainyu had a chance to reply, the other voluptuous woman standing beside her exclaimed, "What? Are you saying that the elder devil race is planning to conquer our human territory?" Not just our human race. The demon race and even the nearby foreign races are all most likely targets that the elder devil race is planning to invade. I don't know much about the specific details, but these are the rumors that are circulating among the higher-level cultivators. In any case, there's no need for you to be overly concerned. Even if the sky falls down, there will be people in higher-up places to support it. I'm sure the Holy Island has already devised appropriate countermeasures, Han Li reassured with a faint smile. That's true. With the Holy Island and Master Mo Jianli to oppose them, I'm sure the Elder Devil race won't be able to succeed, Su Kainyu said in a relieved manner. The other two women were also very relieved to hear this. It was quite clear that the resounding reputations of the Holy Island and Mo Jianli had instilled them with a lot of confidence. After that, Han Li inquired about some details surrounding the devilish army near the Holy Sovereign City, and before he knew it, close to an hour had passed. Finally, Han Li stood up and prepared to leave. I still have some important matters to attend to, so I'll be taking my leave now. I hope to see you again someday. By the way, this is not a safe place to stay. I recommend you return to the Holy Sovereign City as soon as possible. The three women naturally didn't dare to stop him, and they accompanied him out of the room. Azure light flashed from Han Li's body, and he quickly flew away into the distance, while Su Kainyu looked on with a complex expression. As soon as Han Li vanished into the distance, the woman with the oval face asked in an eager voice, "Aunt Su, is that Senior Han the same senior who returned Mistress Blood Spirit to us? Is he really a body integration cultivator?" An intrigued look also appeared in the other woman's eyes. Indeed, back when he visited our Su family, he was already at the early body integration stage, and I heard that he made another breakthrough to the mid-body integration stage not long before the devilish tribulation. Su Kainyu replied with a wry smile. "What? He's a mid-body integration stage cultivator. That's the first time I've seen someone with such a high cultivation base. I heard that you share quite a close bond and even worked with him in Deep Heaven City for some time. Is that true, Aunt Su?" The woman with the oval face asked in an excited manner. "What's the point in mentioning the past? My cultivation base has improved somewhat since that time, but it's nothing compared to the strides that Senior Han has made. He progressed from the deity transformation stage to the mid-body integration stage in less than 2,000 years. That's virtually completely unheard of in human history," Su Kainyu replied with a dejected shake of her head. After a brief silence, the other woman asked, "If that Senior Han really is that powerful, why didn't you try to keep him? With his assistance, we'll definitely be able to complete our task without a hitch. We've been separated from Mistress Blood Spirit, but she specifically told us that the tasks we've been assigned are the key to deciding whether Matriarch Ice Soul will be able to return to our Su family. There aren't even that many people in our Su family who are aware of what we're doing. Senior Han is a benefactor to our Su family, but it would still be best not to disclose something like this to him. In any case, he's already chased those cultivators away, so this place should be safe for now. If we work as quickly as we can, we should be able to secure that item soon, then reunite with Mistress Blood Spirit. At this stage, it would be best not to get other people involved," Su Kainyu replied in a calm manner. The other two women shared a glance upon hearing this before nodding in unison. After a brief pause, Su Kainyu strode into the room again and said, "All right, let's go down again." The other two women naturally followed closely behind her. Meanwhile, in an underground cave countless kilometers away, a crimson-armored beauty was pulling an ice blade that was flashing with crimson light out of a high-grade devilish being's body. The devilish being's lifeless body thumped heavily down onto the ground, and there were two more inky black devilish bodies lying completely still in the cave. Furthermore, All three bodies were covered in a layer of ice and frost. The woman glanced at the bodies expressionlessly before flying deeper into the cave along a narrow passageway. After making a few turns, then descending deeper underground, she appeared in front of an ordinary-looking stone wall. Her eyes immediately lit up, and she flipped a hand over to produce a ball of azure light, within which was contained a miniature azure cauldron. The cauldron rotated on the spot and instantly swelled to around 10 feet tall. It was shimmering with azure light and had projections of flora and fauna surfacing around it. This was none other than the heaven-void cauldron that Han Li once possessed. This crimson-armored woman was naturally none other than the blood-spirit clone of Fairy Ice Soul, and after being separated from the rest of the Su family entourage by the devilish army, she had flown all the way here before making short work of these 3 high-grade devilish beings. It was quite clear that she had led her pursuers into this underground cave for a specific purpose, rather than just as a panic snap decision. After summoning the heaven-void cauldron, Blood Spirit began to chant something while flicking her fingers toward the cauldron in quick succession. Several azure incantation seals shot forth before vanishing into the cauldron one after another, and a loud buzzing sound instantly rang out from the treasure. The lid of the cauldron tremored slightly before flying up into the air and vanishing into space, following which several azure runes emerged from the cauldron amid a flash of azure light. These runes quickly swelled in size before lining up next to one another, then flew directly toward the stone wall up ahead. A dull rumbling boom rang out, and as soon as the azure runes came into contact with the stone wall, the latter crumbled away into dust to reveal an ancient copper gate, which had several shimmering silver restriction talismans plastered to its surface. The cold look in Blood Spirit's eyes eased slightly upon seeing this, and she murmured to herself in an elated manner, "Thank heavens it's still intact. It seems that no one has discovered this place. My true body really made a wise decision by setting up this backup measure." She then flicked a finger again, and a gust of fierce wind struck the cauldron from the side. The cauldron immediately let loose a clear ringing sound before expelling a burst of azure light that swept toward the copper gate. In the face of the azure light, the silver runes on the gate were silently stripped away, and the gate slowly opened on its own. Blood Spirit immediately flew in through the gate as a streak of crimson light, and in the instant she passed by the azure cauldron, it abruptly vanished amid a flash of azure light. Beyond the gate was a slightly dim hall that was around several acres in area. The entire hall was empty aside from a square stone table, upon which sat another small cauldron. This cauldron was also shimmering with azure light and had intricate patterns all over its surface. It bore a strong resemblance to the heaven-void cauldron. The crimson light receded, and Blood Spirit appeared in front of the stone table before making a grabbing motion toward the small cauldron, which rose up into the air and flew into her grasp as a ball of azure light. A hint of elation appeared on Blood Spirit's face as she appraised the small cauldron. Heaven-void cauldron, Void Spirit cauldron, and Void Emperor cauldron. HMPH, I bet those bastards aren't aware that I just so happened to replicate another cauldron treasure before I set off back then. This Void Emperor cauldron is far more powerful than even the other 2 cauldrons. Now that I've secured it, I have the key to access that place again. Once the devilish tribulation concludes, I'll be able to set off for the Thunder Continent. Blood Spirit murmured to herself, and the small azure cauldron in her hand vanished amid a flash of spiritual light. After that, she didn't remain in the hall any longer. She rubbed her hands together before raising them up into the air, and a loud thunderclap rang out as countless bolts of crimson lightning erupted out of her palms in a frenzy to strike walls of the hall around her. The entire hall was inundated by crimson lightning in the blink of an eye, and all of its walls were shattered. Seconds after Blood Spirit shot forth out of the hall as a streak of crimson light, the entire hall completely crumbled. Not long after that, the crimson streak of light appeared in the air above an extremely bleak and barren plain, then set off toward a certain direction. In that direction lay the small city where Su Kainyu's trio was situated. A month later, Han Li hovered high up in the air and appraised the battle down below with a frosty expression. Over 10,000 feet below him, there were over 100 purple-armored devilish beings with peculiar devilish patterns on their faces, and they launched ferocious attacks toward a group of a dozen or so human cultivators. Even the devilish beings with the lowest cultivation base among them were at the nascent soul stage, and they were led by a pair of mid-deity transformation stage devilish beings. This was an elite devilish force. As for the human cultivators who were being attacked, they all wore similar attire, but there was great diversity in their age and cultivation bases. There were a few little girls among them who were only at the foundation establishment stage, while the most powerful being among their ranks was a late deity transformation stage elderly man. This was clearly a sect or a cultivation family. The majority of these human cultivators were at the core formation stage, so even though the elderly man was doing everything in his power to set up everyone in a profound formation, they were still in an extremely perilous situation. The elderly man was controlling a large seal treasure, but his eyes were filled with despair as he appraised the current situation. In the face of so many devilish elites, even if he could escape with his life, all of these juniors of his would undoubtedly be killed. With that in mind, a hint of ferocity appeared in the elderly man's eyes, and he expelled a large mouthful of blood essence toward the seal before pointing a finger at it. The sound of howling wind and rumbling thunder instantly rang out from the seal, and a white worm emerged from it before pouncing directly toward the two mid-deity transformation stage devilish beings. The two high-grade devilish beings knew that the elderly man was making a final stand, and they cackled in a sinister manner as a giant devilish bird projection appeared behind each of their backs. The projections depicted a pair of devilish creatures with deer heads and bat bodies, presenting quite a harrowing sight to behold. As soon as the two projections emerged, they immediately flapped their wings and shot forth to clash with the white worm projection. The two sides seemed to be evenly matched, and right at this moment, the formation formed by the human cultivators was finally beginning to crumble in the face of the devilish beings' torrential barrage of attacks. All of the human cultivators' faces turned deathly pale upon seeing this, and the elderly man let loose a loud cry as he laid a hand onto his own head, preparing to release his nascent soul to truly make a final stand. Right at this moment, a cold harumph rang out in the air above. The voice wasn't very loud, but it struck the listener with a bone-chilling sensation. All of the human and devilish beings down below felt as if thunderclaps had erupted right within their minds, and they swayed unsteadily in response. Immediately thereafter, a ball of azure light emerged, within which a humanoid figure could be seen. The humanoid figure swept a sleeve downward, and over 100 streaks of azure light shot forth before transforming into several hundred streaks of sword chi. The sword chi revolved through the air before hurtling downward, but in the next instant, all of them vanished into thin air as if they were nothing more than projections. Spatial fluctuations then erupted in the air above the devilish beings, and a series of azure flying swords shot forth out of space before whizzing through the air. A string of anguished howls rang out as all of the devilish beings were completely inundated by azure light, and their bodies were sliced into countless pieces. Even their nascent souls had been shredded into nothingness. A vast expanse of blood mist permeated throughout the entire area, alongside the overwhelming odor of blood and gore. After the blood mist dispersed, all of the devilish beings had been slain, and the human cultivators began to look around with shock and bewilderment in their eyes. The late deity transformation stage elderly man was the first to return to his senses, and he hurriedly extended a respectful bow toward the azure figure up above. "Which senior has stepped in to assist us? I am Xianxia of the Pegasus Sect. Thank you for your kindness." The other cultivators also quickly returned to their senses and extended deep bows toward Han Li as well. "We're all humans, so I naturally couldn't just stand by idly and watch. Head toward the west. There are no devilish beings there, so it's safe for now. That's all the assistance I'll be able to give you," Han Li said as he swept a sleeve through the air, and all of the streaks of azure sword chi flew back up his sleeve. The elderly man was trying his best to see the appearance of the humanoid figure within the azure light, but to no avail. Thus, he immediately extended another respectful bow and said, "May I ask your esteemed name, Senior? Our Pegasus Sect will be sure to pledge our allegiance to you as thanks for your kindness." My surname is Han. There's no need for you to go out of your way to repay me. I just so happen to be passing by. All right, I have to go now. Best of luck to all of you." Han Li chuckled and flew away as a streak of azure light before the elderly man could say anything further. After just a few flashes, he vanished into the distance, traveling at an incredible speed. The elderly man was quite startled by Han Li's speed, and he was rooted to the spot for a long while before gradually returning to his senses. "Master, do you know which senior that was?" a nascent soul stage male cultivator asked in a cautious manner. There's no way that a spatial tempering cultivator would be able to kill so many high-grade devilish beings at once. Even the average body integration cultivator would struggle to do what he just did. According to my knowledge, There are only two body integration stage seniors with the Han surname in our human race. One of them is Senior Han Qing, who recently pledged his allegiance to the Heavenly Yuan Holy Sovereign, while the other is Senior Han Li of Deep Heaven City. As for exactly which one it is, we'll have to verify that once we get to a safer place. He saved our lives, and that is something that we cannot simply forget, the elderly man replied. Yes, master. Seeing as devilish beings have appeared here, this place is no longer safe. According to our original plan, we were going to travel to the sect hidden within the Blackwater mountain range, but that Senior Han is telling us to go west. From what I know, the west is comprised of a vast expanse of bleak and barren plains where there won't be many places for us to hide, the middle-aged man said in a cautious voice. Letter 1D487, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D66C, letter 1D65A, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. The Blackwater mountain range isn't too far away from this place, so it's most likely no longer a safe place either. As such, we should place our trust in Senior Han. So what if the west is filled with flat plains? Do you think we'll be able to escape the spiritual sense detection of the high-grade devilish beings if we hide in a mountain range? If we can find a secluded place, then burrow deep underground and set up a formation, there's a chance that we'll be able to survive this devilish tribulation. After all, the elder devil race can't scour the entirety of our human territory, the elderly man said with a cold smile. The middle-aged man thought about this for a moment before nodding in response. We'll do as you say, master. Oh, by the way, collect the storage treasures from these devilish beings. These are all devilish elites, so I'm sure they'll be carrying some valuable things. That Senior Han didn't bother to take them, but they could be of great assistance to our Pegasus sect, the elderly man instructed. The middle-aged man naturally gave an affirmative response before relaying the elderly man's instructions to everyone else. Thus, not long after that, the group of human cultivators flew toward the west, as Han Li had suggested. As for the devilish beings that had been slain, they most likely wouldn't be discovered by the elder devil race for quite a while. Along his journey, Han Li had encountered similar scenarios several times, and upon verifying that there weren't any devilish lords present, he had slain all of the devilish beings that he had encountered without any hesitation. Unless he were to encounter a devilish army with several devilish lords among their ranks, he really didn't have much to fear. Half a month later, a primitive forest appeared up ahead. The trees here were extremely tall and lush, and the dense canopy up above cast eerie shadows over the dense undergrowth. Han Li stopped at the edge of the forest, then peered deep into it. In the extremely far distance, there was a small mountain range comprised of 7 mountains of different sizes. Han Li withdrew his gaze before flying directly toward the mountain range again as a streak of azure light. He was traveling toward the second tallest of the 7 mountains, and after just a few flashes, he reached its summit. However, as he inspected his surroundings, a hint of surprise immediately appeared on his face. There were 2 human cultivators on the same mountain summit, one of whom was a rotund monk in a purple cassia who was sitting in front of what appeared to be a volcanic crater. As for his companion, this was an extremely thin and hideous elderly man with dark skin that resembled tree bark. Both of them were also at the mid-body integration stage, and they had used some type of aura concealment method that had led to Han Li failing to detect their presence in advance. The 2 immediately turned toward Han Li in unison, and the rotund monk faltered initially before a hint of recognition flashed through his eyes. Ah, greetings, fellow Taoist Han. This was none other than Buddhist Master Tian Chan, who was one of the Heavenly Yuan Holy Sovereign's subordinates and had met Han Li once in the past. Greetings to you too, Buddhist Master Tian Chan. Han Li was quite surprised, but his expression remained unchanged as he clasped his fist in a salute from afar. The hideous elderly man had also identified Han Li's mid-body integration stage cultivation base, and his expression changed slightly as he asked in a coarse and raspy voice, "Do you recognize him, Tian Chan?" He, it's no wonder that you don't recognize fellow Taoist Han. He only reached the body integration stage several centuries ago. You've constantly been in seclusion during this time, so there's naturally no way you two could have met, the Buddhist master replied with a smile. Several centuries. If I'm not mistaken, fellow Taoist Han is already at the mid-body integration stage, is he not? The elderly man asked as a hint of astonishment flashed through his eyes. I've only just reached the mid-body integration stage not long. May I ask your name, fellow Taoist? Han Li asked as he returned the elderly man's salute. I am Uzai Ocean. People call me Master Black Rain. Tusk, it's extremely remarkable that you were able to make a body integration stage breakthrough in just several centuries. Even on the Holy Island, I haven't met anyone with aptitude that can match yours, the elderly man said with undisguised astonishment in his voice. Holy Island? Are you a Holy Island envoy, brother Yu? Han Li was quite startled to hear this. I wouldn't dare to proclaim myself to be a Holy Island envoy, but I do indeed currently reside on the Holy Island, the elderly man replied in a modest manner. I've heard much about the Holy Island. It's a pity that I've never had a chance to visit it. Please do tell me about it when you get some spare time, brother Yu, Han Li said with a smile as the shock on his face faded. Under normal circumstances, the Holy Island extends invitations to body integration stage cultivators once every 1,000 years, and some are even able to remain on the island to cultivate. If it weren't for this devilish tribulation, perhaps you would have already been invited to the island, Brother Han, Master Black Rain chuckled. I see. This is the first time I've heard of this. Please forgive me for my lack of knowledge on this matter, Han Li replied with a nod. Not at all. The Holy Island has always been a very secretive place, so it's no surprise that you haven't heard much about it, Master Black Rain chuckled. Benefactor Han, I heard that you moved to Deep Heaven City following the commencement of the devilish tribulation. What's the situation like in Deep Heaven City now? Buddhist Master Tian Chan asked. I am indeed currently residing in Deep Heaven City, and I'm technically a guest elder in the city. Unfortunately, Deep Heaven City is currently in quite a precarious situation. All of the large human settlements around the city have been conquered, Han Li replied with a grim expression. Is the situation that bad already? I've heard that the large settlements around Deep Heaven City all have body integration cultivators among their ranks. How were they conquered so quickly? Buddhist Master Tian Chan asked in a stunned manner. That's quite a long story that I'll tell you about later. For now, would you be able to disclose to me why you and brother Yu have come here? Han Li asked with a curious look in his eyes. Well, Buddhist Master Tian Chan turned to Master Black Rain with a rather hesitant expression. Master Black Rain pondered the situation for a moment before making a decision. Brother Han is one of the most powerful beings in our human race, so he'll be a great ally for us. I think the two of us may not have that great a chance of completing our objective, but if fellow Taoist Han were to assist us, then we'll have a much greater chance. Han Li was even more intrigued upon hearing this, but he merely waited in silence. Sure enough, after receiving Master Black Rain's approval, Buddhist Master Tian Chan nodded with a smile and said, I was thinking the same thing. In that case, allow me to explain the situation to you, Benefactor Han. I hope you'll be willing to lend us your assistance. Han Li considered this for a moment before giving a conditional reply. I'll be sure to do so if it benefits the state of our human race. We were actually instructed by the Holy Island to come here for the earthly hellish flames, Buddhist Master Tian Chan revealed. Han Li had already anticipated this to be the case, but his heart still sank slightly upon hearing this. However, what Master Black Rain said next immediately put his heart at ease. He could see the peculiar look that had appeared in Han Li's eyes, and he immediately added, to put it more accurately, we're here for a certain spirit item within the earthly hellish flames. There are spirit items within the earthly hellish flames. I've never heard of something like that before, Han Li said in a rather surprised manner. Indeed there is, and this spirit item takes 50,000 years to come into fruition. Have you heard of an item known as the Pipe Dream Stone, Benefactor Han? Buddhist Master Tian Chan asked. Pipe Dream Stone, is that the top-grade material used to set up large illusionary formations? Han Li asked as his brows furrowed slightly. Indeed. However, what we're searching for is not an ordinary pipe dream stone. It's a pipe dream stone spirit which has already attained intelligence. Not only can this type of stone spirit only emerge among pipe dream stones, a rigorous set of conditions must be met before they can come into existence. As such, not many people are aware of its existence, and the stone spirit here was something a senior of our race unintentionally discovered tens of thousands of years ago. Unfortunately, that senior was unable to capture it, and it was startled into fleeing into the earthly hellish flames. Even grand ascension cultivators wouldn't dare to venture into the earthly hellish flames lightly, so there was no way that anyone could pursue the stone spirit. However, the mighty figures of the Holy Island have recently conducted divination and predicted that the day of the pipe dream stone spirit's tribulation will arrive soon, so there's no way it can continue to hide in the earthly hellish flames. As such, This will be the only chance we have to capture it, Buddhist Master Tian Chan explained. I see, so the pipe dream stone spirit has already been residing within the earthly hellish flames for tens of thousands of years. No wonder I've never heard of it. However, even if it is a stone spirit that has attained intelligence, it shouldn't be all that powerful. Wouldn't it be a simple task for you to capture it? Han Li asked. This pipe dream stone spirit is far different from normal stone spirits. Not only does it possess the abilities common to all stone spirits, it also possesses the ability to instantly conjure up powerful illusions that one could fall into without even realizing it. The senior of our human race who first discovered the stone spirit was quite a renowned figure at the time. But not only was he unable to capture the stone spirit, he was trapped in its illusions for half a year before finally managing to escape. On top of that, it was said that the ordeal had heavily taxed his body and caused him to fall severely ill after he escaped. The task that we've been assigned with is to capture the stone spirit alive. So even though Buddhist Master Tian Chan and I have made extensive preparations, our chances of success still aren't very high, Master Black Rain explained. I see. The innate abilities of spirit items such as stone spirits are generally all extremely powerful, so it's no wonder that the two of you are proceeding with such caution. By the way, would you happen to know the reason why the Holy Island sent you two to capture this stone spirit? Han Li asked. It seems that the demon core within this stone spirit is going to be quite an important asset against the Elder Devil race, and this task was delegated to us by Master Mo Jianli through the Holy Island. That's all the details that I'm aware of, Master Black Rain replied without any hesitation. The instruction came from Senior Mo. Han Li drew a sharp breath upon hearing this. Fellow Taoist Tian Chan and I are relatively powerful figures in our human race. If it weren't for the fact that Senior Mo was the one who delegated this duty to us, we wouldn't have come to this place, Master Black Rain said with a smile. In that case, it's only right that I do my part as well. Please tell me what you need me to do, Han Li said in a serious manner. Buddhist Master Tian Chan was ecstatic to hear this, and he replied, I knew that you wouldn't turn us down, Brother Han. We don't actually need you to take on any complex tasks. All we need is for you to assist us as the situation requires. If the stone spirit manages to slip past us, we'll be counting on you to stop it so that it doesn't manage to flee back into the earthly hellish flames. Master Black Rain also expressed his gratitude toward Han Li. A thought then suddenly occurred to Buddhist Master Tian Chan, and he asked, by the way, why are you here when Deep Heaven City is in such a perilous situation, Brother Han? Do you have something you need to do here as well? Indeed, I need to use the earthly hellish flames to refine a few treasures of mine, but that naturally pales in significance next to the task that you two have been assigned, Han Li replied. Thank you for prioritizing our objective above your own, Brother Han. I'll have to ask you to refrain from approaching the earthly hellish flames for now. Otherwise, if the stone spirit detects the presence of outsiders, things could become rather troublesome, Buddhist Master Tian Chan said as an apologetic look appeared on his face. Thus, after exchanging some more pleasantries, Han Li joined the two of them and sat down beside the crater as well. He cast his gaze toward the bottom of the crater, and his brows furrowed slightly. The crater was several acres in area, but it was clearly divided into two completely different parts. The top half was comprised of ordinary gray stone, but the bottom half of the crater was as smooth as jade. On top of that, that section of the crater was of a sinister dark green color, and at the very bottom was a cloud of yellow mist that was surging incessantly. The occasional burst of rumbling could be heard coming from within the yellow mist, and it was flashing erratically with faint light, as if it were concealing some type of living creature. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly, and he abruptly flipped a hand over to produce a white formation plate. He flicked his wrist, and the formation plate was instantly hurled toward the bottom of the crater as a streak of white light. As the formation plate passed through the top half of the crater, nothing happened to it, but once it entered the bottom half, layers of ice suddenly began to appear over its surface. It was quickly completely sealed in ice, then thudded heavily into the mist before shattering amid a crisp crack. The yin qi here really is as powerful as the rumors proclaim, Han Li murmured to himself, but his expression remained unchanged. It's said that the earthly hellish flames here arise directly from the depths of hell. Even though it's in the form of flames, it contains extraordinary glacial power. Unfortunately, this glacial power is completely different from normal glacial power and can't be refined by a living being. We humans can only use it to refine some special treasures, and that's quite a pity, Buddhist Master Tian Chan chuckled in a wistful manner. The powers of yin, yang, and the five elements stem directly from chaos. They're the foundation powers of the laws of heaven and earth. The earthly hellish flames here are imbued with extremely astonishing glacial powers, so it only makes sense that its uses are very limited. Otherwise, if a person using a glacial cultivation art could absorb the yin qi here as they pleased, their cultivation base would progress at an unprecedentedly rapid rate. There's no way that such an outrageous cultivation shortcut could exist, Master Black Rain interjected in an indifferent manner. Indeed, however, I've heard that these earthly hellish flames could be one of the entrances that lead directly into the infernal realm. If that's the case, then these flames really are very intriguing, Hanley said with a smile. That's a rumor that's been circulating since ancient times, but these earthly hellish flames are incredibly lethal. Body integration cultivators like us can only delve around 10,000 feet into it at most, and even grand ascension cultivators will be at risk of losing their lives once they reach any deeper than 100,000 feet. Hence, no one can verify that legend, Buddhist Master Tian Chan mused in a contemplative manner. There's no need to entertain such a thought for too long. If these flames really do lead to the infernal realm, then what awaits us on the other side will only be a hellish landscape rife with malicious ghosts and vengeful spirits. The ultimate pursuit of cultivators like us is naturally to ascend to the true immortal realm, where we can truly attain eternal life, Master Black Rain chuckled. Buddhist Master Tian Chan shook his head with a serious expression in response. I beg to differ. Those of us who follow in Buddhist teachings believe in karma and causality. In order to pursue immortality, one must first. Thus, the two began to share their viewpoints on the matter, and an impromptu debate suddenly commenced, one that Hanley found to be rather amusing.